Fair TV, why don't we get started?
This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's February 7th, 2023. I want to welcome everyone to this regular meeting of the Board of Finance. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we rise while our Vice Chairman, Mr. Mottola, leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. To the members of the public who've dialed in or joined us on the WebEx tonight, please know that you are muted and will not be heard by board members. Typically, we welcome live public comment during meetings when there are voting items on the agenda. This evening, we will invite public comment on agenda items 5 and 6. For anyone joining the meeting remotely who wishes to comment on either one of those two agenda items, please indicate so in the chat box now or at any time before the items are heard. As always, members of the public are encouraged to send their comments and questions in writing to the board at bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please remember to include your name and address for the record as you would with live comment. For tonight's agenda, we're going to hear a presentation from Phoenix Advisors, who serve as the town's financial advisor and will take us through a benchmarking analysis of the town's key financial metrics in relation to other AAA-rated municipal bond issuers in Connecticut. We also have our independent auditor, PKF O'Connor Davies, who will give us a presentation on the town's audited financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2022. Those financials were issued and filed last week on January 31st. We have a bonding resolution before us in the amount of $7.7 million, and that's related to 15 separate capital projects. Typically, this board approves capital projects that are under $1 million each in a group in one bond resolution. So we have that before us tonight. And lastly, we're going to hear a proposal to reallocate some previously approved ARPA funds to different projects. Just apologies in advance to my colleagues for not being able to be there in person. I'll try to do my best remotely, but if I need help, I'll call on our vice chair. So we'll move to item 3 to hear an update from the town's financial advisor. The backup materials for this item are posted online. The presentation starts on page 1 and goes through page 13 of the posted backup. Let's see. We have Matt Spurndle. I see you in the box there. Matt Spurndle's here from Phoenix Advisors to present. Welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And we're back again for an update on the town's overall credit with respect to all the various criteria in terms of, the items that the rating agencies look at. We have debt, financial management, the finances, economic activity, demographic type of information, et cetera. Now I have the presentation. I can share my screen. Is that something I could do so that I could kind of look through it? Is that how we want to do it, or what would be easiest for the group here?
That's fine. I think if you're going to share your screen, I would just ask that everyone hold their questions to the end. It's really up to board members if you want to do that, or I think everyone has a printed copy, but maybe for the public, it might be easier if you share your screen.
Okay, then I'll try that now. I'm clicking the button. Let me just, so it looks like, all right, so you can see the agenda for today. And then, so can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Lori. So again, just to reiterate, we take a look at this on a regular basis. This is a critical analysis that we use. in any preparation with the rating agencies or rating presentation in advance of a bond sale, which the town is typically in the bond market in the summertime with various capital projects, and this is something that sort of helps the process in terms of looking at where the town falls relative to their peers. And in this case, we target Moody's AAA Connecticut issuers because that's really primarily what the rating agencies look at. It's always about, where do you fall relative to your peers, relative to medians, et cetera, and it helps with, determining various policies moving forward or what impacts, future bonding might have on things and so forth. So what I'll do is just dive in. Again, most of you were on this call last year, most likely, and, from one year to the next, the credit fundamentals don't really change all that much, unless something really significant happened with, a reduction in fund balance or, there was a major change in the grand list or something of that nature. But, from one year to the next, it's going to be pretty stable. So a lot of these start to look very similar to last year. So I'll just dive right in. And I guess we'll have questions at the end. Lori, is that what you mentioned?
Yeah, that'll be easiest. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'll kind of move through these, relatively quickly. Just to set this all up, we have, again, this is a full list of Connecticut AAAs by Moody's. You see Fairfield there in yellow. I've listed S&P and Fitch's ratings as well. So, as you can see by the list, some communities have 1, some 2, some have 3. If there's a dash there, that just means that they don't use that rating agency or didn't use them on their last call or what have you. So that's the full list. And then there's a note down below. All the data that has been compiled is from the state of Connecticut's Office of Policy and Management fiscal indicators that they put out every year. I mean, this most recent release was August 22. It covers up to fiscal year in 20. So the day it comes out, it's already a little bit stale. But that's sort of the best database that we can use to see where things are. And what we do then is take the town's updated financials, which we have about as fresh financial report as you can imagine, with the 22 audited data, or we use data from the most recent bond sale, which would have been last July, because that incorporated, the most recent issues and things that wouldn't be in that OPM publication. So try to keep the towns as up to date as possible, and all the other items are from the OPM. But again, from one year to the next, things don't change all that much. We'll start off with total fund balance to revenues, and again, I choose and pick these data points. Over the last 23 or 4 years of doing this and working with the rating agencies, there's been some change in methodologies over those couple of decades, but primarily the fundamentals haven't changed. So we've chosen the data points that we present here based on what's important to them, and so we'll move through that here. The first one being total fund balance as a percentage of total revenues. Some towns look at it to expenditures, some to the budget. It's important to note that this is total fund balance as of GAAP revenues as of that fiscal year end. So just keep that in mind. And with each of these charts, Fairfield's in yellow, just to make it very easy to navigate. And also being further to the right is typically indicative of credit strength. Obviously, total fund balance percentage of revenues, the higher, in the eyes of the rating agencies, would be considered the strongest. So again, we'll start moving through these fairly quickly, but you can see total fund balance revenues, on the bottom sort of quarter there, not the lowest, but right in that 12% plus or minus, with the state median of 18.1. It's also important to note that 18.1 is all rating categories, not just the AAAs, but these are in the chart are obviously just the AAA. So you can see total. Next screen is unassigned fund balance. Again, another data point that is very important. And there's a lot of data points that are important, but I think if you really were to boil it down, I think from the perspective of whether it's Moody's or S&P, you're going to get the response that I think these are a little bit more critical, let's say, than grand list per capita or per capita income from one year to the next, because these are the things that you folks control on a year-to-year basis. with your budgeting and how conservative or aggressive you're going to be, and kind of where the mindset is of the boards, councils, legislative bodies, and CEO, CFO. So these do get very closely analyzed and looked at. And you can see here, just about 11% on the unassigned. A couple ticks up from the total number where we were. State median about 15%. So right in the mix. Whenever we look at these things, we look at, okay, are we generally towards the lower end of all the charts, or are we generally towards the higher end? Obviously, if we're the lowest in most of the categories, we're going to have to be concerned with the rating change, or at least some rating pressure. Of course, over the course of time where we have the rating calls with these agencies and give the presentation, there's a lot more to it that go on than just these numbers. There's qualitative, there's a lot more discussion and things that impact the rating, but these are all obviously very important to the overall credit of the town. So just wanted to mention that. So we have unassigned here. Now we switch over to the debt burden, and there's various measures of debt burden, and one is overall net debt to the percentage of equalized grand list. We use equalized because that's the state's way of kind of trying to compare everyone on an apples to apples, since everyone's on different reval schedules. And the town has obviously you folks all know that there's some larger bond issues that have gone on and so on, and the debt burden is on the higher side of the AAAs. Again, not the highest, at about 1.25%. It's something to note, I believe, in S&Ps or forget which rating agency. The concern level doesn't really happen on something like this, and until I think it's like 2.5% to 3%. So we're well below those numbers, but just on the AAA side of things, you're a little bit higher just relative to Connecticut. So that's debt to equalized grand list. Now we have overall net debt per capita. Again, another debt profile metric. Still sort of on the left side, but not too far over there. In about the 3,400 per capita bonded debt. Again, including the most recent issue. We have another debt metric is the debt service to the budget. Of course, this is the expenditures, the GAAP expenditures, and you can see that in this case we're actually just right at the midpoint at about 6.5%, 7%, which would be considered relatively stronger. So that's good. Now we have a wealth indicator here, grand list per capita. So not debt per capita, or not that we're looking at your actual equalized grand list per capita, and you're right in the middle, between Norwalk, Madison, Richfield, Farmington over here. Greenwich, kind of an outlier, obvious reasons. Darien, New Canaan, those folks there. So that, per capita income, again, right pretty much in the middle. Woodbridge and Simsbury. Again, these are numbers that really aren't going to change much year to year, and numbers that you really don't have a lot of control over either from year to year. So it's kind of like you're dealt the cards, you have the hand that you were dealt, and it's just a matter of sort of trying to, create other strengths along the way in the reading continuum to get to that AAA category, which you've done a very good job of. Tax collection rate over 99%. I mean, even if you're over here on this end and you're at 98.8%, nobody's going to give you a hard time about that. That's exceptional. Unemployment rate, again, most recent numbers that we had at least was December 2020, which is old. But again, snapshot point in time, you're further to the left, but nothing causing any major concern at all. And it's important to note that really, based on rating calls we've had recently or over the last, 5 years or so, there really haven't been any major concerns or any real thought of, a downgrade, or even, there's been very little communications to me from the rating agencies that there would be any major rating, even a concern leading up to an outlook change is really not something that we've really been concerned about recently, which is great. We have a couple more charts. This one is all your bonded debt, your pension, and OPEB liability. OPEB being other post-employment benefits, which is really retiree health care. Obviously, you have the pension liability, which gets a lot of press, not for Fairfield, but just in general, particularly 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago when some of those pensions were really getting out of control and underfunded. Obviously, the market returns we've had, maybe not last year, but the prior couple of years did a lot to sort of help some of those ratios in a lot of these pensions come up quite a bit. But as you can see here, all that liability per capita, and you're on the left side of the grid, but nothing again to be too concerned with. And this was per capita. Now we're looking at equalized grand list. I think you're in the same exact spot, fourth over from the left. Farmington, Glastonbury. Again, nothing too worrisome. And that is the end of my presentation. I have open for questions, comments, and anything else that you might have. And if you had a question, I could pull up the chart again just so we could look at it or whatever. Or we could just, whatever else you might
Yeah,
have.
it might be, unless anybody needs it, I think we have a printed copy. It might actually be helpful if you pull it down so that we can all,
Sure.
everyone that's remote can see the screen again.
Okay, so I will now stop sharing. Okay.
Okay. Great. All right, so unfortunately, I cannot see the room very well. So I'm going to ask John Matola, would you mind just moderating the Q&A here?
I think the first question is,
Now you're back, but John, you can go ahead anyway.
Mr. Stark has a question.
Thanks. Mr. Spurndle, I'm curious about the example of New Canaan in your charts. High fund balance as a percentage of revenues, a very average level debt burden as a percent of the grand list, but a very high debt per capita, higher debt as a percentage of operating expenses, and a very high grand list per capita. The contrast that struck me there, though, is that the debt with pension liability and OPEB is actually quite low, whereas the net debt per capita is quite high. Is that because of a pension overfunding? Do you happen to know?
I don't know specifically with regards to New Canaan. My guess would be once you layer in OPEB in particular and pension, some of those liabilities are just massive, and people really don't, we don't really hear a lot about them or talk a lot about them. I mean, we see, oh, they're building a high school, they have a $50 million bond issue or something, but from one town to the next, some of these OPEB and pension liabilities can just be enormous, and they impact obviously some of these ratios. Sure.
I understand that, but you actually put actual dollars amounts here. So for net debt per capita, you have about $5,000. And then when you add pension and OPEB, it's only $3,000. So I'm just wondering if there's maybe a typo or.
I could look into that. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, again, these get pulled in, from the fiscal indicators, so I'd have to take a look at that one.
Okay.
So I could do that. I'm not going to have an answer for you right now, though.
Madam Chairwoman, when the time comes, I have more questions on bonding, if Mr. Spurndle's the right person to ask.
Okay.
Lori, Ms. Leclerc has a question.
The question relates to the first chart that we received, the Connecticut peer analysis. And you mentioned that we went out for a bond in July of '22. Did we apply to all three credit agencies at that time and get a AAA rating?
we applied to Moody's and S&P at that particular time. Well, in fact, the July new money issue, we did Moody's and S&P, and then we came back with a refunding immediately following that because the market worked out that way for us. And I think we only asked Moody's for that one. We kind of rotate around the three, depending on, the year. So this year we'll probably, we'll bring Fitch back in, and maybe we won't have S&P in the call.
Okay, because that was my question.
They're not cheap, so.
Okay, because that's why I was looking, we were the only one that had all three credit ratings, and I was wondering, Norwalk too. Okay, and I was wondering why. So they're not all at the same time.
Greenwich also does, actually. They just, on this last issue, they didn't use Fitch, and for whatever reason, again, in the fiscal indicators, they didn't. I think it might have been a couple of years since they used Fitch, so they dropped them. A lot of these folks have had the three, and now some of them have two. It just kind of goes with preference and where they are in their ratings and what their objectives are.
Thank you.
Mr. Curley has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Appreciate that. Matt, thank you for the presentation. That was very helpful. Certainly appreciate the way that you've stratified the various charts. Makes it pretty easy to interpret, so appreciate that. I just had a question about the data itself, or at least the population for the data. There are 16 towns here that you've listed that are peers to Fairfield. I guess my question is the selection criteria for those 16. I imagine that there are more than 16 municipalities that are AAA rated, but more specifically, I wanted to ask if we could get updated charts that would include 2 or 3 similar or towns with similar demographics but are AA rated, so that we can understand not just the points that you made about the further you are to the left, the more you are in jeopardy, but it would be an interesting data point to understand where we are in relation to a AA rated municipality.
No, I appreciate the comments. First of all, on the analysis, we strictly have Moody's AAAs. So that's why, this is Moody's AAAs in Connecticut, and that's the exhaustive list. So, there's obviously 169 towns, there's school districts and things like that, and those charts would just get crazy. But we could do, I could work with Jared, and we could get something together if you wanted to see what Fairfield looked like relative to the next rating category down would be a AA1, which is equivalent to a AA plus. We could do that with, a handful of towns or towns that you guys had in mind, or you specifically. We could do all that. Whatever you wanted to see, we could provide.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That would be helpful. I definitely think that the town of Fairfield and everyone on this board takes our AAA rated rating seriously, and we don't want to jeopardize that, but certainly various points of comparison to understand the floor would be helpful. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I see no one else with their hands up, so you have a question.
I just have if no one else has a question on the presentation, I have just a couple questions for Matt. They're not exactly on the presentation, but maybe just as informational for the board. So as you probably know, because you help with the waterfall model that we all use to, look at our capital plan. And we have a very different scenario unfolding before us in the upcoming years, where our WPCA, which is a separate taxing entity, is looking at projects and looking at issuing a substantial amount of debt. So I'm not suggesting this is something we would want to do or could do, but I'm just curious, in terms of other municipalities in Connecticut, are there others where they have a separate taxing entity like the WPCA issue their own debt, versus debt that's backed by, versus, debt that is a general obligation of the town. So I guess that's my question. And if that's the case, what does that look like? Do those types of entities generally have similar pricing, et cetera, as general obligation bonds of the municipality that they're part of?
That's a great question, Lori. And yes, I'm familiar with obviously the WPCA stuff coming down the pike. And I will start to answer this question, and then I will punt it to my good friend John Staffstrom, who I see he's got a suit on. I know he's dying to talk. Because he obviously we have a ton of overlapping clients, but we have a lot that aren't. And I will say, at least in my experience, and we work with about 85 towns in Connecticut, 85 issuers, which is the vast majority, really. And I will say that in almost all cases, I could say this: I've never done an issue for a town, like a local government, where it's done specifically by like the WPCA. Okay, so that should tell you something. I've done hundreds and I don't know, maybe 1,000 issues over the 25 whatever years. So I'll preface it with that and say, but obviously there are tens of millions of hundreds of millions of sewer bonds that are outstanding right now for Connecticut issuers, and I think they all do. I'm sure there's a lot of similarities in what some of them do, and I'm sure it's very different in other scenarios. And I can say that there's a lot of communities that will, the town issues the debt because the town's doing a school, or they're building town hall, or they're doing roads. Okay, here load on the sewer project, and let's do that. And you get the credit, you get the benefit of the full, GO credit, in this case, a AAA credit, so as good as you can have, issuing the debt at the lowest possible interest rate as a result, backed by, really backed by the GO pledge, the general obligation pledge of the town. But in many cases, the town issues the debt. The town's obviously responsible for paying for the debt, but internally, the accounting is that, hey, WPCA, here's the debt service. You're going to raise your rates to pay this. And it's done sort of inter-fund, like the accounting of it that I don't really get too involved with. Yeah. But when we do those issues, really the only way that we get is the involvement that we have is really, okay, we're doing a $20 million issue, $5 million for sewer. All right, rating agency, ABC, just so you know, this $5 million is self-supporting. So that will be paid by the users. And it really doesn't count like against your debt limit and things of that nature. So, that's one of the areas that we get involved in just from that perspective. But that's not the case in all towns. Some towns might just say, well, general, it's going to increase or it's for the benefit of the general taxation, the general base. We'll just pay it in the mill rate. Or it could be a 50-50 subsidy. Or they could do a 20-year issue and, charge the WPC back over 30 years to get, if they can't really afford it. So it's really a mixed bag. And John, I don't know if you have anything else that you would add to that, but that's what I see the most of.
Yeah, I would agree with Matt. Again, it's John Staffstrom Pullman. Agree with Matt. Again, it's John Staffstrom. We have almost as many clients as Matt, maybe not quite as many, but we represent 70 or 80 Connecticut municipalities. And as Matt says, we do not see a WPCA in these municipalities issuing their own debt. Obviously, a lot of our clients take advantage of the Clean Water Fund loans and grants through the state, which the town of Fairfield does when that's available. We do represent a number of regional water authorities like the Greater New Haven Regional Water Authority, but that's a whole separate issue. But in most cases, if there's a WPCA project, our clients do exactly what the town of Fairfield does. You issue bonds on behalf of the WPCA because your credit rating would be much, much better than if the WPCA tried to do anything on its own. So you issue the bonds and the debt service is paid for user fees, assessments, other things from the WPCA. So the model, Ms. Chairwoman, the model that you follow is really the model that all of our clients follow.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I assume that was the case. I've had some questions about that in terms of, how we do it, and everything you said is consistent with my understanding. I did listen with interest, though, to Matt's explanation about how when the debt service is to be paid through the self-sustaining fund, and we have a formal, MOU that provides for that,
Correct.
that there are sort of, that's, I don't know how you'd want to characterize it, but even though it's part of the town's debt load, you sort of, manually look at it, or somehow that's considered so that it, perhaps doesn't affect the town's, the perception of the town's debt load in precisely the same way as it would if those were just regular general obligations of the town.
And I might just interject one thing. Just even in some of the charts that I had up on the screen that you have in front of you, when you look at like overall net debt, so that number by definition is your outstanding total debt that you've issued for schools, sewers, town roads, things of that nature. And it backs out, well, back in the old days, you have state grants paying for debt service under the old program, or it back out self-supporting sewer debt, self-supporting water debt, and you get down to that net debt number. And then that's where like really a lot of the ratios that, investors and rating agencies things look at. Now that being said, the town has some larger numbers coming up on the WPCA. So it's not necessarily like a slam dunk thing. We say, oh no, that's just WPCA, they're going to pay for it. Well, we have to sort of prove that, when we talk to the rating agencies, to the extent that, oh, they can handle it, they're going to raise the fees enough, and so on and so forth. And if they're not able to do so, well, then now all of a sudden, that might come back on and not, get full credit for being a self-supporting obligation. So that's just something to sort of keep in mind too, as we move forward.
Yeah, and
Thank you. That's enormously helpful.
I'd add one other thing as a policy matter. The way you do this now, to the extent that you issue GO debt, but the WPCA repays that GO debt with user fees. You have two large entities in town, Sacred Heart University and Fairfield, that are tax exempt, but that do pay user fees and are big users of the system. So the way you structure this now, by having the WPCA in effect reimburse the town for the debt service, means that those users who would not otherwise pay taxes are actually paying the debt service on those bonds.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is all very helpful. So Matt, if I got this right, the net debt analysis that you referred to, that we looked at earlier in your charts, that net debt does not include debt of the self-sustaining fund?
It would back out the whatever portion is self-supporting to get to that figure.
Got it. Okay, got it.
As it is presented in the official statement, when we do the bond issue and we have the debt statement, so that's where that number comes from.
Right. Yeah, no, good. And I understand that does depend on, that entity having the wherewithal to pay the debt. And, so that is one of the things we're looking at, solidifying a plan as to how that funding is going to happen and how it will be feasible. So thank you for that. And just one more question, sort of related, and just again, based on your experience. So the WPCA, we have all these large projects coming up because we have some very old infrastructure that we have to deal with, 75-year-old infrastructure. So I guess my question is around the term of the bonds that you typically see. And here in Fairfield, typically we don't go beyond a 20-year term. What is your experience with infrastructure projects of this nature that have a very long life? Do you see municipalities ever issuing bonds that have terms of, 30, 40 years? I'm not sure what's permissible under Connecticut statutes, but in practice, what do you see there?
That's a great question. And I'd say this, if you think about, well, these sewer projects are long-term projects and, these systems are going to be in place for, decades. It's kind of the same with schools, right? I mean, you put up a school, it's probably going to be there for 40, 50 years, and we typically issue 20-year bonds for them. So, we want to keep that sort of in the back of our mind. But as a practical matter, the state of Connecticut allows issuers and has for some time. And John, anytime you want to jump in if I mess this up, they allow you to go out 30 years. They have for sewer, and then they include schools, and then they basically in the last 5 years they created legislation for some of the communities that needed to go out longer, and they basically said you can go out 30 with just about anything if you want. You know, there's some caveats in there that I'm sure John would love to give you the granularity of, but you know, the bottom line is you can go out longer than 20. You know, we're talking about sewers now, so you can go out longer than 20. Now, as a practical matter, you know, that's been in place for a long time, and I'm just looking at so if we looked at competitive bond issues, this is just going to give you perspective. So for competitive bond issues that have been done in the state of Connecticut for the last 5 years, and this isn't just my deals; these are all the deals in Connecticut. Again, competitive. So competitive issuers are typically the ones with the, you know, high A, double A rating and up. You know, building schools, pretty plain vanilla, but that's, you know, I don't know, 90% of the local issuers do it competitively. I looked at it earlier, and I think there was something like 250 issues done over that period of time. I'm actually opening it up again just so I have my numbers kind of straight here. Over the last 5 years, about 250. Let me just double check this quick. Yeah, right about 250. And there's literally been like 4 issuers that have gone beyond 25 years out of that 250. I guess just kind of keeping into the theme here, you know, schools have a longer useful life than 20 years. You know, sewers have a longer useful life. But as issuers actually come to market with these issues, they're almost always 20-year max. That's not to say we can't go out further, but that's just sort of the reality of the issuance. And I'll tell you this, we've had numerous conversations with issuers like yourselves, you know, maybe not on the WPCA side. The more normal one might be, you know, a smaller town that's doing a brand new high school, and it's a, you know, $100 million project. Oh gosh, how are we going to pay for this debt? We're going to have to go out 30 years and all this kind of stuff. So we do our little waterfall in other communities, and we look at, okay, let's say if we did this over 30 or 20 or 25, and the numbers, it's nice to conceptually think about, well, it's 30 years, you have less debt service in the beginning, obviously, because you're spreading it over a longer period of time. But the numbers, when you actually look at the numbers in terms of what the interest cost is on those projects for that period of time, the conversation usually ends there. And the reason why, I'm going to give you a quick example. You know, let's just use 20 million for fun. 20 million at an interest rate of about 350, which is where we would be today. You know, it's about, we're actually hopefully a little lower, but just use 350. So on 20 million, we're paying about 7.3 million in interest back over 20 years. Okay, so 7.3, 20 million. If we were to do a 30-year issue at 20 million, just to give you an idea, and let's say the interest rate was 4%, because you're going out a little further, you know, it's an ascending yield curve, it's fairly flat, but you're probably closer to 4%. You're going to be paying back 12.4 million. So we went from 7.3 to 12.4, you're paying $5 million back in additional interest. Now you get the benefit of the lower payments in the beginning, but that is a big number. And when you're talking about, you know, 50 million, 80, I mean, tens of millions of extra dollars in interest. And typically that's where the conversation kind of comes down to, okay, I think we can work it into the 20-year model. And there are some things you could do. You can reduce the first couple of principal payments. There's some massaging we can do, but the state statutes and things don't allow us to, you know, kick things too far down the road, because obviously that would get a lot of people in a lot of trouble. Fortunately, there are those things in place. But, you know, that's sort of the conversation that we can have it, you know, in the future talking about these projects. But I just wanted to give you some kind of perspective on just quick numbers and what it means to go from that 20 to 30.
Okay, thank you,
And
thank you, John.
I would add I would add of all of our clients, the only ones of our clients that usually go beyond 20 are what you would consider the more distressed municipalities who want to spread their debt out, a Bridgeport, a West Haven, cities and towns that are not sort of in the financial category of Fairfield.
Okay, great. Again, very much appreciate the perspective. John Matola, I don't know if anyone else has a follow-up.
Mr. Stark has his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a few. Given the rally in the municipal bond markets we've seen since summer, I was wondering, is the town set up with its disclosures and financial statements such that it could actually conduct a bonding exercise before July to take advantage of these low rates?
Okay, so the question is, because rates have come down, can we bond sooner than the summer? Basically.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing really preventing us from issuing sooner. I mean, the town does have the bonds. We have notes coming due in the summertime, and really the way things have kind of gone over the course of the last, I don't know, decade or two. So the notes come due July 7th. We sort of get everything started, April-ish, and we look to sell sometime in June. Now, if there's a big rally in municipal bonds and rates really drop down, typically what happens wouldn't necessarily be we're going to bond sooner. It would be, okay, is there any opportunity to refinance bonds that had been issued in the past that are currently callable, which we've done numerous times over the course of the last 15, 20 years. In this particular case, we asked about disclosure documents and things of that nature being up to date. Well, the town hasn't started, we haven't started the process of preparing the official statement, rating. Those things all have to happen and take a couple of months to get geared up just in general. So it's not as if we could flip a switch and bond tomorrow. And we really can't, we have to be at least within 90 days of the notes maturing to be able to take those out. And it's very unusual. It would be very unusual for a town to, refinance a note ahead of time. And I'll also say, you talk about the rally in municipal rates. I mean, rates have really rallied for the last month or so. I wouldn't really say since the summer. Municipal rates peaked in November. And we were at a point where we were probably issuing bonds, 20-year bonds at almost 4%. Now we're closer to about 3.25, maybe 3.20. Whereas 2 years ago, we were issuing at 1.50. After the pandemic and all that stuff settled down and the 10-year treasury went to a 0.6, we did bonds at the lowest rate that any town has ever done bonds in the history of bonds for about 18 months. And then obviously 22 happened. January 2nd, oh gosh, inflation's a problem. Rates came up all year and they just have started to rebound. So I wouldn't really, it's been a nice rally and it's great that rates are a little bit lower. And it does look like the Fed is not on a course to continue with these really aggressive increases. So I see more stability, if anything else, moving forward into the spring, with respect to municipal rates. I will say that rates are low relative to treasuries, and there's a chance that as the supply picks up, even if treasury rates don't move much, we might see a drift in the short end municipals. Again, with the supply pickup, but it's really nothing that I would say, is something to create us to bond, in the middle of budget season, for instance. So that's kind of where we stand on that.
A follow-up question. The refunding exercise we did a few months ago, do you happen to know the change in interest rate from the old bonds to the new on average?
Yeah, not off the top of my head, but I could open it up and find out for you.
That'd be great. A couple more things. The town of Manchester today did a $20 million bond issue, and they priced quite a number of the bonds with coupons as high as 5%, but they sold them at a premium to par, such that they actually took in $21.5 million. I was wondering if you had any insights as to why they would do that, and would you encourage other towns to do the same?
When we put a bond out for a competitive sale, it is up to the bidder to determine how they're going to price the bonds. So they determine the coupon, they determine the yield, and coupons above yields create premium. The market is a 5% market and has been for some time. So we see coupons. We'll do bond sales, and there could be 10 bidders, and every bidder on every maturity could have a 5% coupon. It's just a matter of the yields. Obviously, they're selling at premiums. They're more attractive to the buyers. I mean, we don't dictate that. They put their best bid together to result in the lowest true interest cost to the town. And as the notice of sale would state, we accept that bid. So that's not unusual. I think they sold at like a 319 true interest cost. Today at the note was a 285, and that's just something that, again, is market driven. So that should answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great answer. The town, in other words, didn't have much control over setting the coupon. Is that right?
The town has virtually no control over setting the coupon.
Great. That's all I have. Thanks.
Obviously, if you're paying on a 5% coupon, that premium that comes in should theoretically be used to offset debt service going forward to come back down to that 3% or 350 true interest cost. And again, that's sort of an internal thing that's done. It's sort of semi-dictated by accounting standards and bond council recommendations and things of that nature. But that's kind of how that works. So we did the refunding in last year, and the total. Let me just see here what we got. We saved about $740,000 of debt service over the remaining term of the bonds, which is about 12 years. The true interest cost. So when you're doing a refunding, you compare the true interest cost to the coupons of what you're refunding, because you're paying on those coupons, remember. And in this case, our true interest cost was $222. The average coupon of the bonds that we refunded was a $350, so it was about a delta of about $120, and that was about $13 million plus or minus, $700,000 of saving.
That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, I don't see anybody else with their hands up, so I think we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Rotolo. I do just want to say, I saw a couple of hands up from others who have joined the meeting, and unfortunately, we don't have public comment on this item tonight. So, individuals who are not board members, apologize that we won't be able to take any of those questions, but again, would encourage you to reach out to the board, and to the extent you have questions on anything you heard tonight or comments, we'll make best efforts to get them answered and respond promptly. All right. So if no one else has any questions, Matt, I just want to thank you again for being here tonight and for everything that you do on behalf of the town. We appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks very much, Marie. Thanks to the board, and good luck this evening. See you all soon.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we are going to move to item 4 to hear an update from the town's external auditor on the annual comprehensive financial report. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. Testani, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Okay, the backup materials for this item are posted online, and there are a number of documents. So the audited financial statements begin on page 14 of the posted backup. That's a lengthy document, but there is also a separate backup document posted online entitled Item 4 Additional Backup, which includes a letter from our auditor with some required communications to those in charge of governance, which would be this board, and also a presentation that highlights certain key aspects of the financials, including items that have changed and some other important metrics. So we have Mr. Joe Centofanti from PKF O'Connor Davies here to present to us. Mr. Centofanti, I will turn this over to you.
Is that to kind of walk the items, for instance, this document is, if we're gonna get some 2000.
Hey, Joe, we're having trouble hearing you.
Joe, you're cutting in and out a little bit. Not sure if you're using your computer microphone or not.
Works better, I think, so it'll be a little bit of a way, but, all right. So we're gonna walk through 2002 highlights, discuss the financial reports, which are financial statements, the federal and state single audit, and then provide the required communications, and then talk about some future considerations, some new GASBs that are coming up.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Joe. Joe, should we be following along in the PowerPoint for this
Yes.
discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So again, for the benefit of the public and the board, this is the document that's entitled Additional Backup. All right, go ahead, Joe.
Okay. So I'm on the page, the divider page, 2002 highlights. So a few highlights are there's a new opinion format this year for the auditor's report. So basically, substantially, the major change was it changed the order of how we report. So it starts now with the opinion and then talks about all the different responsibilities. Previously, the opinion was the last thing in the report. Now it's the first thing. The other major change this year.
We're losing you again a little bit.
Lessor and lessee. So the lessor account where they're receiving rents, there's a receivable and a deferred inflow, and that's recorded in Exhibit C, the back statements, it's actually recorded in the general fund and in the parking authority fund. And then for lessee at Exhibit A, which is the government-wide statements, and then also again for the parking authority, it's recorded basically in the accrual basis statements only. And we'll go over some details of those footnotes a little bit later in the presentation. So looking at the financial statements, management discussion analysis, it's executive summary of what some of the changes. So it talks about
We really, hey, Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're having difficulty hearing you. I don't know what's going on.
parking authority.
Joe, you're sort of going in and out. At times your voice is coming through clearly, and then we're sort of missing every other sentence. Not sure where your mic is.
I'm talking on my computer, right in front of my computer, which is where the mic is. So not moving around, so I'm not sure why it's cutting in and out.
Okay, right. What you just said came through clearly, so whatever you did was good.
All right, I'll try to. So I may not be looking at you then if I'm talking at my computer. So I
Oh,
apologize.
that's
for
good.
that.
Don't move your head. Just.
All right, all right. So the parking authority operations changed in that position of a negative 32,000. MD&A will talk about capital assets, some of the significant transactions during the year, talk about long-term liabilities, again, including leases for the first time this year. And it also talks about some of the general fund budgetary highlights, such as the transfer for the 8.4 million and other things like that. And we'll talk about some of the details of the general fund separately. So I'm talking about the general fund section. Unassigned fund balance at June 30 was the $39.8 million. It's 11.75% of 2002 expenditures and transfers out. So I saw that Matt uses revenues, but the standard measure that we usually benchmark, we use expenditures. Prior year was 11.34%. There was a slight increase. Change in net change in fund balance was the $3.5 million. Some of the increase because of the new lease standard, and that was kind of implemented a little bit late. So 554,000 of the net change in fund balance was a result of basically the revenue recognized because for the lease standard because it's done by present value. So that added additional revenue that wasn't kind of probably in the last reports that you saw. The next page is just a chart of fund balance, and it's just charting your unassigned fund balance, kind of a trend. It's just been a fairly steady trend up to the 39,790 that you're at right now. So the fund balance increase came from basically two places, and I'm looking at, if you want the details for all this, it's on RSI 1 and A and B, which is pages 100 through 102. So revenues and other financing sources were in excess of budget of the $1,256,000. That was driven by property taxes at $599,000, of course, after the $7.5 million budget transfer. Intergovernmental was in excess of budget of 1.3. Investment income was below budget by 1.7, and the cancellation of encumbrances added to the fund balance. On the expenditure side, expenditures were under budget by almost the 2.2 million. Administrative and general was 192,000. A good portion of that was Conservation Commission. Finance was under budget by 434,000. The largest item there was IT was under budget by 150,000. Public safety was under budget by 356. The largest portion being the communication center was under by 287. And then education was under by 539. Again, you can see all the different variances on the RSIs 1A and B. Right. The parking authority, as I mentioned, there's a decrease in that position of 32,000. The prior year was a decrease of 200,000, so operations have improved. You'll see that the parking authority has lease receivable of 180,000. And many of the parking authority leases are month to month, and the lease standard doesn't apply if you're month to month. So there are other leases. The number would be higher if those were leases that are longer than 1 year. There's a lease payable of the 3.3 million for the use of the various parking lots. And then I also did book an asset for right to use, ending at a net of $3.2 million. Internal Service Fund, similar table that I've had in prior year presentations, just showing kind of how you've trended. So again, your current ratio is a 3.78, which is well above 1. So we're in good shape there as far as ability to pay current liabilities. The total charge for services were a little bit lower than last year, and the claims were up 1.3, but basically change in that position was 66, basically a break-even year. So your earning that position was $6 million at June 30. The pension and OPEB, I'm sure as everyone is expecting, some of these numbers went in the opposite direction of last year. So the biggest driver of the results in the pension funds, starting with the employee plan, was the change in fair value was down $30 million as compared to or for current year. So that's a swing about almost 85 million as compared to being up 54.5 million last year. So that resulted in change in that position being down about the $30 million. Investment rate of return was a negative 8.9%, almost 9%. And the funded ratio, which was up to 96 last year, is now down to 82.31. And it's similar for the police and fire plan. The numbers are there. I won't walk through all of them, but basically the funded ratio did go down 19, almost 20% as a result of the same factors, decrease in the fair value. And it's similar for both the OPEB employee plan. The funded ratio only went down 5.6% for the employee plan, and for the police and fire, 4.49%. So next was the environmental liability. So this is on page 60, the long-term, it's on the Exhibit A, but the footnote shows the change on page 60 in the audit. So basically the balance went from 19 million of the liability at July 1 to 14.9 million in June 30. And so I included, did get updated vendor estimates as of January of 23 from the engineering, what they thought, and then what management's estimate was, which was a little bit higher than that, and ending with the liability coming down to 14.9. Again, because it was a January estimate, we added back what was paid during fiscal 23. So subsequent to preparing this, I did the number, the $4 million number was a cumulative number because I did misread the information that I had. So the current year expenditures, and I can resend this if this helps, is really 1.467, and the change in estimate was a decrease of 2.646. So the liability is the same. It's just the components of what drove the change, what basically paying for remediation and then a change in estimate. The next section is leases and the lease receivable. So there's a new accounting policy note on page 41 that just talks about the accounting policy for the recognizing the receivable and how we calculate and use of the present value. So on the financial statements, it's presented as Exhibit C and F. So the lease revenues in the general fund, so the lease receivables in the general fund, and Exhibit F is his parking authority. So basically the standard is requiring that they book a receivable for the length of the lease and any expected extensions, but because it's governmental accounting, then they have you defer the inflow and the receivable gets amortized over the life of the lease. So you book an asset and basically deferred inflow or liability or credit for the difference, and that is amortized into revenue over the life. There's a new footnote disclosure that's on page 52, which we'll look at in a minute. So there was a prior period adjustment for this, but the prior period adjustment had no impact on equity. So basically we booked the prior period was to record the receivable as of July 1/21 and to record the deferred inflow as of July 1/21, and they were both the same number. And then they changed with current year activity again with the present value calculation. So next page 25 shows the lease receivable activity. This is the exact footnote from the financial statement. So this footnote is on page 52. It shows the total lease receivable at June 30 was almost 13.3 million. The deferred inflow resources I was mentioning is the 12.7, and lease revenue of 1.1 was recognized, and 415 interest. So the other effect of the statement was that instead of just a lease payment of 1.5 million, now some of it's principal and some of it's interest. So just classification. Lease payable. Again, the accounting policy note is on page 44. the presentation on Exhibit A again. So lease payable effectively is the same as issuing debt. The accounting is exactly the same. So the other side of that is the capital asset, which is the right to use that asset. So that capital asset then is depreciated over the life of the lease. And you can see that on page 56 and 57, the capital asset footnote. And then for lease payable, it's on page 60, 61, and 63. Again, prior period adjustments, but no impact on equity because the beginning entry is to book the capital asset and the liability at the same number. And then depreciation and that service payments happen and those numbers change going forward. So on page 27 is the lease payable footnote. This is on page 63 in the audit. This is again the exact footnote. So the required disclosure is what you're leasing, the lease terms that are remaining at July 1, 21, because this is an implementation year. And the next year, that will just roll. So the lease payable balance is 2.4 million for, we'll say, general government, general fund, and for the parking authority, it's the 3.3 million that we referenced before. The project and debt authorizations. So I tried to provide some little clarity around, there's two different footnotes. We'll talk about the cap project authorization, cumulative expenditures and balance, and then there's a authorized unissued footnote, which is a lot less detailed. But the project authorization is basically the authorization to spend, and that's the way pretty much government functions. So you always have to have an authorization to spend. So that would be the total amount that whatever the project is, independent of any funding source. So it doesn't matter if you're paying for it with bonds or grants or taxes, the authority to spend is X amount for that project. So basically it's a project length budget. So versus the general fund is an annual budget. These are project length budgets and the purpose is, again, budgetary control over your long-term projects. For the debt authorization, it's just the authorization to borrow. And there's all sorts of ways that is done, and then customarily, we'll say for school projects, we'll look at example is you do authorize, because it's required for those projects, to authorize the full amount to borrow, even though there's no intent to borrow 100% because you're going to have grants that are going to fund some of that. So again, the purpose is just the project funding net of other resources available. So I'm not sure if the schedule is going to make it clearer or less clear, but I tried to present the schedule that showed kind of the first part is the project authorization note. And if you looked at note 2C, where we show a project where the project authorization is 32 million, spent 2.9, the balance to spend is 255,000. From a debt perspective, same authorization, but issued 2.4 million in debt, and the balance to borrow is 800,000. So because they're measuring different things, I calculated a difference that they're not the same number because you're measuring how much do you have to spend and then how much are you allowed to borrow. And again, the grants are going to impact that. So I just picked 8.4. That's just a current year transaction that was transferred in for remediation to show that there's a project authorization you authorized by transferring that in to spend 8.4, but there is no debt authorization for that because it's not necessary because you had the money. And then Duck Farm Road Bridge, that one, the authorization to spend was 3.7, but the debt authorized was only 3.280. Again, a different number, which again is certainly allowable, assuming that grants are going to fund the difference. All right. So that's all I have. My comments on the financials, the federal and state single audit. I can go through those quickly, or unless you want to do questions now or just at the end. But So the federal single audit, we had no findings or question costs, unmodified opinion on compliance, and total federal expenditures were $17.6 million. So we tested 3 programs: child nutrition, the ARPA grant, and ESSER grant, which is the education ARPA, basically. For state single audit, the same, no findings or question costs, unmodified opinion on compliance, total monies expended, 13.770 million. The programs that we tested there are the tiered pilot and the MRSA pilot, which are kind of combined. Now is kind of the old colleges and university. The state kind of created a new grant, and that was the result. And then the LoCIP grant was tested. So with respect to required communications, that's that 4-page letter. As far as estimates go, we do look at estimates. Pension, OPEB, and the environmental liability are the most significant estimates that we look at and we do test. It references that there was a new accounting policy during the year, which related to GASB 87 leases. Disclosures are neutral and consistent, and we are independent of the town. There was one past adjustment for accrued payroll, unsettled contracts. So based upon the calculation, I think the past adjustment, it's attached to that letter, was 960,000. That's a difference between the city's estimate and our estimate based upon recalculation. So what's coming up for the future? Next year, GASB 96 is effective, and that is subscription-based information technology arrangements. So we expect this to have a significant impact on school districts because of the use of technology and learning and long-term agreements. So this is basically the lease standard for software. So this is going to be a significant project to get a handle on as far as what leases are out there, and to kind of do the same accounting that we had to do this year for leases. And this would be just on the liability side. And then the other one that's effective, which is out a little ways, is compensated absences, effective for fiscal year 2025. It's requiring, what the standard is trying to do is attempt to standardize the calculation and practice. The first standard for compensated absences goes back to GASB 16. So in practice, I think the calculations aren't consistent as far as a projection of when a benefit will actually be used or earned versus recording it when it's paid. So this attempts to try to standardize that practice. All right. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Centofanti. Appreciate the presentation. Mr. Mottola, maybe we could do this the same way. I have a couple questions, but I'll defer to the board first. So maybe if you could just moderate the questions at the table, and then I'll go last.
Sure. Any questions from board members? Mr. Testani?
Yeah, hey, Joe, how are you? Thanks for coming. Just a quick question on the expenditures. Just trying to get a little clarification. So let's just take finance. So if I understood what you said correctly, IT was under budget by 150,000, is that correct? Out of the, right, the total was 434,000 under budget in finance, right? And out of that, IT was, from what you said, was 150,000, the majority of that. Where would you say the other areas came from within the administrative function? And then I have a couple follow-ups after that.
All right, I'm just having a really hard time hearing you.
Go ahead, Jack, one more time.
All right, basically, I just want to know on the administrative, underneath finance, on the general fund increase in fund balance, I just wanted to get clarification on what, I mean, I'm happy, it's unusual, I think, to have that kind of increase in fund balance. I just wondered what you attribute that to, and was it the IT that was 150,000 is what I had written down out of the total of 434,000?
Yeah, so if you have the hard copy or the PDF, you look on page 101 in the audit, it's going to show you all the other departments. So finance itself was under budget by 100. Assessor was under budget by 104. And then IT 150. And employment 51. So those are all the pieces. I just was picking out the biggest one for it's just to provide as what the largest driver of the under expenditure was.
And the same is true on the others, Joe, as well, in terms of what you picked out as far as the general fund increases, correct?
Yeah, this is the contributing to your 2.1, almost 2.2 amount that was underspent.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Curley has a question.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Joe, for the presentation. That was a great walkthrough. Appreciate your time. I had a question about just a clarifying question on the environmental liabilities. I thought I heard a contradiction there. I just want to make sure I understood how you clarified that. You had talked about and I'm looking at the chart on the PDF in the backup. It's on page 27 of 44, the environmental liability. You talk about the total ends at 14.924 million. Expenditures during fiscal year 4.2 million. I thought I heard you say that was a cumulative number, but the annual number was less, but I didn't get that number. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, and yeah, the 4225 number, or I pulled that number from the data I had, that was a cumulative number from 2020 to date. So the current year number was 1,467,000.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Madam Chair, I do have a couple of questions, but they're probably a couple of additional questions, but they're probably better directed to Mr. Schmidt. So I'll defer back to the room.
Yeah, can I just, thank you, Mr. Curley. Can I just sort of redirect to Mr. Centofanti with the question you just asked? Joe, now I'm confused. That analysis is a roll forward from last year to this year. And I thought I heard you say that out of the cumulative number was not cumulative spending, but that 1.467, I wrote these numbers down, was actually spent this year, and 2.646 was a change in estimate, meaning that we estimated that the liability for remediation, the estimate that we came up with is lower than the estimate we had last year. So can you clarify that? Because if that's cumulative spending since 2020, I'm not sure how that would roll from last year.
Well, if you look at the footnote in the audit, so the liability decreased by the 4,113,000.
Since 1 year ago, correct?
Since 1 year ago, yes.
Right. Okay. Yep.
So what I was trying to do here is just give you perspective on what. So unfortunately, I grabbed 4225. It's cumulative. It said.
Hey, Joe, you got to get close to your mic again and start over.
So once I understood that, so that it doesn't change the total, it doesn't change the liability still decreased by 4,113. It decreased for two reasons. Just the numbers are just different. The 1.467 that was spent, and then the 2.646 that basically the estimate changed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, because I think when you first responded to Mr. Curley, it sounded like what you said was that the $4 million was cumulative spending, but it's not. This is a 1 year change, of which roughly $1.5 million is money we spent, and then the 2.6 million is we had a change in estimate, or at least the town did, because apparently the engineers estimated that liability to be substantially lower. But that's a change in estimate where we, the liability is now believed to be less than what it was a year ago, June 30th, 2021. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure we all understood that. I also have some other questions, but John Matola, why don't you revert back to the room?
I don't see any hands raised with our group right now.
I've got a quick one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Stark has a question.
Page 76 and 77, this is deep in the weeds accounting stuff, but I want to make sure I understand it. The police and fire pension decrease in funded status was much more severe than that of the town. And it seems to trace from the difference between expected and actual experience, which in turn seems to stem from the differences in active years remaining. Is that correct? That it's partly because the employees plan assumes 3 more years and police and fire assumes 6.6?
All right, again, I'm having just a little bit of trouble.
Maybe I should make it simpler. All right, reduce the question to something simpler. From an accounting perspective, why was the police and fire retirement plans decrease in funded status more severe than that of the town?
Nice. Well, I think you referenced 76. More of a question for the actuary because change in
Joe, I'm sorry, you're cutting out again. Can I just interject here? I did hear you say I caught the beginning of what you said, which was that it was more of a question for the actuary, which I understand that. And Mr. Stark, I seem to recall our actuary explaining to us during the budget season that was a function of a bunch of retirements and earlier retirements. That was the negative plan experience that we were having. But we can certainly follow up on that with the actuary unless, Joe, you have additional insight to that.
I don't know exactly what it is, but it's the line between expected and actual experience.
Right. And yeah, I think that was retirements were higher than were projected during, when the assumptions were set the previous year. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Anybody else?
I just have a quick follow-up. And I don't know if this is for Mr. Centofanti or for Jared, but maybe we can get an answer on this, going forward or at our quarterly meeting. I do want to follow up on page 30 of the presentation, project and death authorizations, and specifically the line item CNR remediation costs 2022. I don't believe we had a spending authorization for that amount. I did go back and looked for the past, 2 years or so. I could be wrong, but I think what that represents is we set aside money for those remediation liabilities. So we transferred surplus, into an account, but we did not authorize that money to be spent. So I just want to check on that. If we believe that was actually authorized, maybe Jared or Caitlin or someone can get back and help us understand when we voted on that, because it was my recollection that we put money aside, but we had to vote on using it. And I don't recall voting on a spending authorization in quite some time. And sort of connected to that, I want to understand the money that we did spend, the 1.467 million, and under what authorization that money was spent. And related to that, what is left under that authorization. So, we can follow up on that at a future meeting, but I think that's important because there was a period of time where we were getting regular updates on the remediation spending. And I recall that, I'm going back now a while, but, there was a projection of what we'd be spending in the next 6 months. The board authorized it. When the money was going to run out, we were authorizing more. I just don't remember authorizing any spending on those items in quite some time. So maybe that's an item we can get some more information on and follow up on in the next meeting, as well as I did request from Mr. Schmidt an analysis of what was spent and what it was spent on. I was initially alarmed when I saw the number was, presented as 4 million because I couldn't believe that we had actually spent that much this year, and apparently we didn't. But with respect to the 1.46, I think it would be helpful for the board to understand what that money is being spent on, what sites, what projects, et cetera. So I will make that request for the record for our next meeting.
Yep, I think
And I don't have
Mr.
anything
Schmidt might
else.
want to say something. Did you want to comment, Mr. Schmidt?
No, just that we will follow up and get you those details.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then,
By the 8.4, I just did that for presentation purposes, so that's not actually in your records. I just did to show that it was fully funded with taxes and there was no debt, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I appreciate that. For me, really where I was coming from was, making sure that we are getting a spending authorization to cover those remediation costs, because I don't recall that we voted on one for quite a while. So transferring the money or putting the money aside is not a spending authorization. It's just setting it aside. And then there needs to be an authorization to spend it. So that was really the genesis of my question. So we'll follow up on that at the quarterly.
Madam-
And then just, I guess if I could just ask one final thing, I do just want to clarify. So in your past audit adjustments, what you told us there is that we've got an accrued payroll number that's overstated by your calculation for close to $1 million, 960,000. And you characterize that amount as being related to unsettled contracts. And that's a difference between what you've calculated and what the town has accrued. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah, it's in the accrued payroll line, but it's really the calculation for the unsettled contracts is really where the difference is.
Okay, so that's a rather significant number. So that's helpful to know as we go forward during our budget season. So thank you for that. I don't have any more questions.
so,
John, does anyone else in the room?
yes, Mr. Curley has his hand up.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Lori. So I have a follow-up question for you, Mr. Schmidt, regarding the general fund. I'm looking at page 13 of the additional backup. I just want to understand the increase year over year. I seem to recall that this board had talked about trying to maintain the general fund balance at the prior year. 11.34 is what's noted in the chart, making sure that any surplus funds that were available could be redirected to for other uses like Penfield or remediation, without adding to the general fund. And I note that the presentation indicates that ending year 2022, that general fund increased from 11.34% to 11.75%. I don't know from the detail here, I don't know how much that translates into in terms of dollars. But I am curious about how that number went up when this board had talked about trying to hold that flat. So just looking for some color there.
Hi, this is Caitlin. I could talk to this a little bit. So when we do all of our quarterlies, we estimate what we think revenue and expenses are going to be. We did a lot of transfers this year We took the 8.4 in revenue early on in the cycle to say, okay, we think our budgets or our surplus on revenue was going to be 8.4 because we knew that one had to go to all three bodies, right? So we estimated our revenue surplus at about 8.4. This is really where just to give you a feel, the difference from 11.34 in terms of dollars is like 1.2 million, okay? So that came in more than we thought. I was trying to keep it at a $2 million number in rough calculation to our expenditure number to keep it around 11.34. So it was 1.2 higher than I thought, just to give you in terms of, on a $350 million budget. Keep that in mind too. 550 of this is a new lease revenue line that was brand new this year that I had no idea what that number was going to be. I didn't know if it was going to be 0. I didn't know if it was going to be $1 million. I had no idea. So 550 of this 1.2 extra money in revenue was related to leases. So really, in my conservative view, when I always do my quarterly, it's a $500,000 difference, which to me is, I would keep that as a little buffer number because I don't really know cancellation of POs, what's going on the board side in terms of their cancellation of POs. I don't know what happened with leases on their side. So there's always some numbers in the end that change. So really, it was a $500,000 number on a $350 million budget, so.
That's helpful. Thank you for the clarification. And just to add on to your clarification, just to go back to you, Joe, I think the $500,000 number that Caitlin mentioned regarding the leases, that was related to a change in accounting treatment, correct?
Correct.
All right, I'm all set. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, John, I just want to follow up on that. I think that's it's not a large number difference from the estimate that we got in Q3, but I guess my question is, going forward, I know in the past we've typically, we talked about transferring the full amount of surplus and putting that aside for future things so that we didn't, create fund balance and then, take anything out of fund balance. So I guess my question is, how long does it typically take us to close the books? And when should we expect that we have a final number going forward so that the board can, talk about what the final surplus is and have an opportunity to set aside additional fund balance if that's appropriate?
Just to give you in terms of timing, Joe, you can talk about your piece of this after mine, because clearly operationally, we have to close the books first. So we keep accounts payable open through basically, I want to say mid-August to ensure we get all of our June invoices in, but I have to be honest, we get June invoices, I don't even want to say when, but at the end of August, we're pretty comfortable. We got 99.5% of them. We can't pay the ones we don't know about. I mean, that's just the way it is. And then we start.
No, I hear all that, but is it reasonable to say that going forward by like the end of November, for example, we're going to have a final number on our surplus, between the audit and closing the books?
I would say if you don't care about the government-wide stuff, the capital assets always take us a long time to close out. That's usually a mid-November-ish number that really doesn't affect the general fund, so to speak. If you're talking about strict general fund budgetary numbers, yeah, I would say early to mid-November.
Okay, all right. No, I appreciate that. So going forward, it's something that we should keep an eye on so that we get a final general fund number and we can just determine whether, collectively, the town can determine and talk to the board about what the decision is, just so that we don't end up creating additional fund balance by default when that wasn't the intent. So thank you for that. I don't know if there are any other questions in the room on the ACFR or for Joe.
No, I don't see any.
All right. Well, Mr. Centofanti, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for being here tonight and for all the work that you do on behalf of the town. Looks like you're off the hook, so we will see you soon.
Great, thanks. Good night, everybody.
All right, good night. Okay, so if everyone can just bear with me on this next item for a moment. So I am going to move to item 5, non-recurring capital, 20 years. So this is to hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled, "A Resolution Appropriating $7,687,622 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation." Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. Matola, seconded by Mr. Testani. Okay, the full resolution is included in the posted backup beginning on page 195. An amended version of this resolution was approved by the Board of Selectmen last evening. And specifically, the amount of the resolution changed. It was reduced by $432,600 because one of the projects on the supporting list we have is not actually up for a vote tonight. And so this will become clear as we work through the project list. So before we vote, I'll plan to introduce an amendment to the amount to be consistent with what the Board of Selectmen voted on last night. And we can vote on that amendment before we vote on the project. The project list for the individual projects that will be part of this resolution that we vote on is on page 199 of the posted backup. It's entitled Exhibit A. So if everyone can sort of keep that as a reference point, we will, I was going to walk through these projects or ask that we walk through these projects in the order that they were presented. But if we have individuals who are here tonight for public comment, I hate to have people waiting around. So if there are individuals who want to speak to kind of the non-engineering projects, whether it be Parks and Rec or something else, we can take public comment now so that you have a chance, to be heard without sitting here for too long, if that's okay with everybody. So it looks like we do have someone. Welcome, and if you could just state your name and address for the record, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, my name's Jim O'Brien. I'm a Southport resident, and I've lived in Fairfield since 1982. I'm here to talk about the pickleball courts and what's going on with our town. And I was impressed with the Phoenix Associates presentation, talking about how you have to compare yourself to your peers. Today, we have 3 functional pickleball courts in the town of Fairfield. And so many of us have resorted to going to other towns to play. And so Trumbull actually has a dozen brand spanking new pickleball courts. So we park our cars on the street in Trumbull because we're not allowed to go in their parks without a park sticker, like our beach stickers. And so we park on the street and we walk into their park and we use their facilities. It's a little embarrassing for us, for sure. And, we think that, the town needs more courts, obviously. And there's a proposal here to modestly add some courts. It won't equal what our peers have, but it's a step in the right direction. And one little FYI, pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the United States. So I see some smiles over here. I think some of your board members may know about it. So thank you very much. We hope that you'll give consideration to that proposal.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Are there other members of the public? All right. Welcome.
Thank you. Betsy Hume here in Fairfield. I was part of the committee with...
I'm sorry, could you please state your address for the record as well? Thank you.
I was involved when the town made the first pickleball courts. 37 Pratt Street here in Fairfield.
Thank you.
Okay. I was part of the committee which worked with Jerry Lombardo, 8 years ago approximately. And at that time, we converted what had been a well-used tennis court into 4 pickleball courts. And over the years, the court has diminished because roots are growing up, weeds are growing up, nets have been removed because it's not been safe. and to reiterate that it's been embarrassing to have friends from other towns come and play on our courts. What's very exciting about pickleball is that it's not just for the senior citizens. If you come out to the courts, you can see families playing with their children. I've seen grandparents playing with their grandchildren. Currently, the Wakeman Boys and Girls Club and the Burroughs Community Center in Black Rock have asked me to come in and work with their middle school and high school students to learn to play pickleball. And it's only going to continue to grow. And we desperately need your support. We desperately need the more courts that are on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public?
Good evening. My name is Doug Goodman, 11 Aberdeen Way in Southport, and I've been a resident of Fairfield for 53 years. And before I give my comments, I couldn't help but notice the Penn State Nittany Lion on his water bottle. So I'm feeling a sense of simpatico here as we speak. But anyway, I just want to parrot what my predecessors said about pickleball, and not much more to say about what they said about the embarrassing condition of the courts. But I think more so, I would just urge you, I know you're going to be selecting which projects to approve in this $7 million. And I would strongly urge you to pass the appropriation for these 6 pickleball courts, which are desperately needed here in town. So I hope we have your vote of confidence. And if that Nittany Lion means anything, we'll see this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say go blue, but I don't want to start a. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Oh, one more. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Julia Galemi. I live at 221 Lindemer Lane. I have been a Fairfield resident since I was 5 years old, so I am a lifer. Pickleball is something that I feel like unites every generation of people. I'm definitely representing the younger midlife generation, but all of my friends, everywhere that I go, the work that I do, I'm a therapist, pickleball seems to be coming up in all my conversations. And it's something that is, like already said by so many people tonight, it is catching like wildfire. And so it's one of those things where like I'll try to get a court and I won't necessarily get a court. It's something where we'll show up to the courts and the courts won't be in great condition. And so this is something where I to be honest, I have looked into, is Fairfield the best place for me? And that, I'm not gonna lie, there's a part of me that has thought about like, where can I go to do my hobbies? And it has crossed my mind, is Fairfield the right place for me? And this is a piece of like, if we have those 6 courts, like that will draw more people here to Fairfield. That will draw more pride for the town. That will draw more communities, more people together in the community. And it's something that I feel like I would love Fairfield to be a step ahead rather than a step behind. And I feel like these courts will be a big part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there anyone else?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, thank you, everyone. I do not see anyone in the chat box, so it doesn't look like we have anyone online speaking. I want to thank those of you who came to the meeting, and thanks for hanging in through a long agenda tonight. Just to let you know, when I introduced this item, there are rough 14 or 15 projects that we have to discuss, and we are going to vote on a single resolution. So unfortunately, if you want to stick around for the vote, you may be here for a while, or you can always tune in later and figure out what happened. So just wanted to make you aware of that. So with that being said, I want to refer the board members back to Exhibit A. And I think what we'll do is just for ease of following, we can go down the list in order. And we're going to start with the engineering department. There are several projects here. Bill Hurley is here to talk to us about these projects. So Bill, I will turn it over to you.
Madam Chair, before we start, Mr. DeWitt has his hands up. He wants to say something.
Sure. Mr. DeWitt, sorry, I didn't see you there.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair. Just administratively on the resolution, Exhibit A, there's a project on Exhibit A, number 4, that was not in our waterfall chart last week, $611,000. There's a project that was on our waterfall last week that was deleted. So before we get into the details, and I know Mr. Hurley will have great details for us, I'm kind of curious from the CFO, which, did he go? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Jared. I'm kind of curious what happened, because it's literally a week. A week ago, we were sitting here with this list, and kind of curious what happened in a week.
The one that you're referring to, that was not on the list last week, which actually went out at least 2 weeks ago. You guys have had that. And so it got added. It was something that you voted on to accept the grant for. It was a steep grant for $500,000 for the sidewalks. That's what that one is, the $611,000. And if you remember the conversation at the time, there's a question about where the town match was going to come from. And, we were trying to find ways that we could use some kind of operating funds or, other ways to match this. In the end, I think it'll be cleaner, and that we appropriate the money through and bond the money for the match. And the match is $111,000.
So I guess maybe it's just a procedural question, but it's nowhere on this 5 years. I mean, it's not even in next year's budget. So I'm curious how and I don't remember on voting on it. I'm sure I did, but I'm just curious of the process. We spent all last week talking about the process, and it's just surprising to me to see a $600,000, and it's only $100,000, I guess what you're saying. Well, we're going to bond for $600,000, right?
No.
Well, Mr. Staffstrom said to us, just made a comment today, that we do bond for the total amount even if there's a match, correct?
We authorize bonds for the total amount. But in this case, we have an approved grant for the $500,000, so we would not bond that $500,000.
But Round Hill Road here says the $611,298. So that looks like the number that contributed to the 7.6. Even though there's a note that says expected grants, we are bonding for the full amount.
No. We'll authorize you.
We'll authorize for bond.
Yeah, you guys will authorize the full amount.
Yeah.
And there will be a spend authorization for the full amount. But the amount that, in this case, the amount that's going to get actually bonded will be the difference, the $111,000.
Okay. And again, this total number is going to go against our what's the word I'm looking for? Our bonding budget, right? I know this is non-recurring, so it's a small part of the number, but we are overstating our bonding budget by $500,000 by doing this, right?
No, because we typically go by the net amount is what we measure that by, is the net amount after any kind of grants or reimbursements of any kind. So it would only be the $111,000.
Okay. So what happened to Camden? for $642,000? Because that's off the list.
Camden came off. There's some question about whether or not that was going to actually happen over the next year, and so we took it off the list.
So okay, so it came off this week. Okay.
And just generally speaking, there's a lot of projects on here, and we, Bill can attest to this. We're getting updates on these on a daily, weekly basis because there are so many, and so we get updates on whether it's an estimate or whether or not a grant would be approved. So these things change.
I get it. I just didn't think it would be in a week, but okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Jared, before you go, sounds like Chris did the same thing I did, which I think most of us do when we get authorizations before us, which is to look at these dollars in relation to the waterfall. So we talked about Camden, which was on the waterfall, not up for a vote tonight. Same thing for Greens Farm Bridge construction. And then a new project was added. So I think maybe what would be helpful going forward is as these things do change, just so that we don't kind of have to go through this process, it would be good to get the capital project or the waterfall schedule updated. So for example, Camden may, maybe we'll decide by April or May that it's on. So maybe you don't want to take it off yet. It's just, maybe we will in fact approve it before year end. But I think it would be helpful so that as we move along, given how frequently things change, we have an updated project list that we can track against. I assume you're doing that internally anyway, so maybe it can just be part of what's provided to us.
We are doing it internally, and we, sure, be happy to follow up. It was, in this case, the Camden Street was a net of $40,000, and this was $111,000. So some small dollar amounts that had a negligible effect on our capital plan.
Yep, understood. Okay, thank you again. All right, so if anyone doesn't have any more questions on the overall schedule, I guess we can go to back to Mr. Hurley. And Mr. Hurley, you want to just go in order down this list? Obviously, number 2 is off the list, Greens Farm Bridge construction. So maybe just take us through the other ones in order. And I suppose we could take questions after each project if anyone on the board has them.
Sure, I'll do a quick summary, and then obviously if there's questions or if I went too quick, in the interest of time and so many other projects, just let me know and I can slow down or whatever. The guide rail, the town-wide guide rail, town of Fairfield infrastructure is aging, and in many cases, the roads and bridges do not comply with the current codes or roadway standards. Based on bridge and culvert reports, many of the roadway bridge approaches are lacking proper guide rail or have aging guide rails or fencing that need replacement. The purpose of the project is to address many state and consultant directives or recommendations listed in those bridge reports, our own roadway inspections, and an occasional public complaint. Based on these directives and recommendations, almost 4,000 linear feet of guide rail sections we have about 65 bridges and culverts in town, and a dozen roadway sections have been listed. The request for $200,000 would approximately cover 1/3 of our higher priority locations. The engineering department will provide design plans and specifications. Funding will be utilized for the guide rail systems, and it includes the railing, the anchoring, bridge attachment systems, removal and disposal of the old guide rail, safety fencing, maintenance and protection of traffic, reflectors, and erosion control if it's applicable. The request is based on the Department of Transportation cost estimates and the state DAS bid pricing. This request is in addition to the existing ARPA funding. There was $200,000 allocated, I believe it was last year or maybe 18 months now. And to let you know on that, we have spent about half of that money, and this spring we're spending pretty much the remainder of that money at 6 different locations for this spring, and this would obviously be for the next budget year. The project is non-recurring capital, and the guide rail has typically a service life of 30 to 40 years unless, crashes reduce its functionality.
Okay, before we go to the board, Bill, can you just clarify, the schedule says 210,000 and your backup says 200,000. Which number is correct?
I have it as 200,000. That might just be a typo.
Okay, so then we would need to reduce this number overall by 10,000 based on that. Is what I'm getting. All right. All right, let me make a note of that. So that'll change the amendment to the authorization. Does anyone, questions for Jared? Do you have follow-up?
Yeah, I just, and I guess I'll ask Bill while he's next to me. Do you have $10,000 more of work that could be done on guide rails?
Yes.
I would suggest to just leave that the way it is. It's it's a small amount, and I think this is a phase of many phases, and that it's a small amount of money.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It's helpful if we have the backup to agree to the schedule. So,
It probably
other
would
board-
be easier because I'm sure the Board of Selectmen voted on 210, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's a good
Great.
point.
Okay. Other questions from the board on this item? Mr. Curley?
Yeah, real quickly, I just want to understand the timing. So you talked about 4,000 linear feet, talks about roughly 65 bridges and about a dozen roadways. Budget cycle, this would be available July through the following June. Would you expect this work to be done next spring, 13, 14 months from now, or this fall?
It'd probably be a combination of both. We basically, in a nutshell, there's 2 main contractors that are on the DAS list. For each group of proposals, we usually go anywhere from 3 to 6 at a time, and we ask them to resubmit proposals, and then our purchasing and engineering go through them, find out which one would be awarded, and then we award them that. And so we tend to do them in like groups or season. So yeah, I would say realistically, we would probably do half of them in the fall and then half of them the following spring.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Curley. Other questions, Ms. Leclerc? Mary, are you speaking into the mic?
I wanted to confirm the estimated useful life of the guardrails.
Yeah, typically it's 30 to 40 years. So it's beyond our 20-year bond, if that's what, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Bill, do you want to move on?
Yes, I'll do yep, Stratfield Road. We are estimating a design of $325,000, and there's a $2 million construction range. On this one here, the state of Connecticut has awarded the town from state bonding an urban grant based on a road safety audit performed along Route 59, Stratfield Road. The state awarded this grant to the town of Fairfield as a way to encourage alternate modes of transportation and to increase safety for pedestrians and vehicular traffic. The section covers from Stratfield Road from Montauk Street down to Collingwood Avenue and includes potential safety improvements at Churchill Road and Route 59 and Churchill Road and Wilson Street intersections. The exact details of this grant have not been released yet, but based on similar grants that the town has received, we would be responsible for 100% design, and then they would pay 100% of the construction costs covered by the state grant. I believe it would be, we'd have to confirm that, whether that'd be reimbursable or if they pay it up front. That's the only thing we don't know yet. The purpose of the project is to address the many public complaints and concerns about pedestrian safety and roadway safety. Reference is made to the Stratfield Road Safety Audit, where we had input from the state DOT, the Fairfield Bike and Pedestrian Committee, state representatives, state senator, town officials, and members of the public. The report listed the problems, issues, and concerns, as well as recommendations and improvements. And this is a continuation of the sidewalk network where we got a grant for we call it the Stratfield Four Corners. And this will be an extension of that. That one there was awarded back in November, and we expect the contractor to start work late March or early April, depending on the weather. This proposal will include replacement of outdated narrow sidewalks along Stratfield. There'll be new sections of sidewalk, ADA accessible ramps, pedestrian crossing features, pedestrian countdown signals will be investigated, and potential realignment or the improvement at those two intersections I mentioned earlier. A consultant will provide survey plans and specifications for the contract bid. Bonding, again, is non-recurring. The concrete sidewalks have a service life of about 40 years, pending roots, tree roots, utility cuts, and any localized disturbance. And I'm here to answer any questions on this one.
Yes, Mr. Stark.
Oh, thanks. We're only bonding the design phase for now, right?
That would be correct.
And I know the study hasn't been done yet, but do you think it envisions sidewalks on both sides of the street where there currently aren't any? Or?
In some cases, there are sidewalks on both sides. Then there is one section that isn't. That would be a matter of how far the grant would take us, to be honest with you. And we, for a lot of these grants, we are required to hold a public informational meeting. So if there's obviously strong neighborhood support for that extra, side, we would do that. If not, then we would just do the main side all the way to, Collingwood as proposed right now.
Okay. Are you done? Are you set, Mr. Stark?
I am good.
Yes. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Just so, Mr. Hurley, and just for clarity, I understand that this is just for design, and the full project you're expecting to be 100% covered by a grant, but is the and maybe this is a question for Jared, because I don't have I just have the non-recurring piece in front of me here. Is the full project on the waterfall somewhere, and if so, in what year?
This was a state grant that we has gone through the State Bond Commission, which is a fairly good indication that we're actually going to receive the money. Is it on the? Let me look at the. Give me a minute, and I'll look at the waterfall and see if it's on there. I believe it. I'm pretty sure that we have it on there.
This Stratfield Road is in.
I was wondering about timing, and I do understand about the grant, although I know that we usually list the projects for the gross amount and then show the grant so that we can see the full scope of the projects that are being completed and the timing on that schedule. And again, I just don't have the out years handy.
It's in fiscal year 25
under
25, capital.
Right.
25.
$2 million.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Fully
Appreciate it.
reimbursed. Fully reimbursed, so it says.
I'd just like to add, when it comes to these grants, sometimes we don't know the exact timing. Even with this road safety audit, it was a project that was conceived back in January for the most part. The wheels started moving. We were able to get the state bonding or the state grant for it. And then, you know, you might recall when we presented it before, you know, they want a quick turnaround. They give us 15 days to go through the town process. We luckily got the extension, but, you know, sometimes these things are quick, but they still didn't give us the exact details. The other one, which we'll talk about later on, the STEEP grant, they put it out, I think it was maybe in October. Oh, by the way, you have until November or something like that. Then they make a decision, we get awarded, and boom, they want to work right away. So, you know, sometimes these things take a year or two just to even get the agreements, and other times they want them done in 60 days or 15 days in the one case, you know. So we do our best, and I can understand some of the frustration on that, but you have to realize, as Jared said, that some of this stuff is so dynamic, and usually we figure people don't mind if it's positive.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and part of the reason I'm asking is, one, being interested in the timing, and secondly, part of what we talked about last week is, you know, with all of these projects, the financial piece is one aspect of it, and as Mr. Schmidt pointed out, and as we've seen over these past 2 years, the operational ability to do these things is a separate challenge. And you know, for that reason, I just think it's important that we, you know, to the extent this plan is dynamic, that we keep up to date on what's being proposed and the timing. So thanks for that. And if anybody does anybody have any other questions on this one, or we can,
Just
Mr. Stark?
real quick one. Is it commonplace for towns to do these kinds of analyses and upgrades on state roads?
Yes, typically the state has, I'm going to say it's a law, but I'm not quite sure, but it's certainly their missive that they only maintain curb to curb. And so anything beyond that, bricks, straight pavers, sidewalks, handicap ramps, any of that stuff is the responsibility of the municipalities, all of them. And I've gone to a couple of workshops where they've kind of griped about it as well, and there's nothing, unfortunately, we can do about it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, Mr. Hurley, you want to move on to the Post Road project?
Sure. In the interest of time, again, very similar situation, state bond. The state of Connecticut awarded the town the state bonding from the urban grant. It covers the Post Road, if you can imagine, just east of the Circle. It doesn't include the Circle, but east of the Circle to Kings Highway East. We call it the Post Road Jug Handle to Shoreham Village Drive. And these are obviously the similar safety improvements that were mentioned before. The exact details of the grant have not been released yet, but again, we're figuring that we'd be responsible for 100% design with 100% of the construction costs covered by the state. Let's see. Yeah, pretty much very similar to the other project, but just in a different location.
Okay. All right. Questions?
Madam Chair, I just have a question on grants in general. Hey, Bill, how are you? Thanks for coming, as always. Just curious, do the other grants, so you've got a couple listed, right, out of the projects. Does that mean the ones that don't have the grants don't qualify? Have grants been applied for in some of these other cases? I'm just curious how you differentiate what has been applied for a grant and what hasn't, or do they all automatically try to see if they're grant eligible?
Almost every project that we come up with, we constantly look for grants. There's even there's some, we were even starting to look for grants for next year's projects, you know, fiscal year 25 or 26, especially nowadays with the IIJA and some of these other programs. through our grant writer as well, the town's grant writer, and then DPW, Economic Development Director Mark Barnhart, Conservation. We all get together pretty much a once-a-month basis and try to find better ways to fund or come up with, funding for these projects.
So the projects that are on here that don't have the grants allocated to them, does that mean they're not eligible? Were they considered for a grant? I'm just trying to figure out what may have happened in those cases.
So it really depends on you really got to go project by project and look at what's available, what are potentials for grants, and it would be different for each of the projects. And look at.
Well, one thing that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Jared, but one thing that, struck me was the Strathville Road specific, because it mentions, and Mr. Stark alluded to it, with the state. So like, I would think, I'm not a grant expert, but, certainly there seems like there should be one possibility somewhere that the state should offer something to help. I mean, again, in the scheme of things, $325,000 is a small part of this bond, but having said that, if the town can get some reimbursement for that, maybe it's worth double checking, I'm not sure.
We have checked before, there's no.
I figured you
Yeah,
probably did,
yeah.
though, I just want to make
That's
sure.
okay, that would make it official, yeah. We checked it, as I say, we constantly look for that. And then there are some bigger projects, I'll even just, real quick, that circle that I was talking about, we were talking to state delegation, we've talked to MetroCog, the regional planning agency, we've talked to the DOT, and if that project ever comes to fruition, we are definitely going to try to at least figure out, let's just say arbitrarily, this one becomes 80-20, that at least we split it with the state, 80-10-10. They had done that way back when, but then, as I said, this missive or state statute had changed everything, and now it's the responsibility of municipalities.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Any other questions on this one? Okay. So, Bill, moving on to the next one, which Jared talked about this a little bit. We got the steep grant for it. So this is the Round Hill Road, 611,000. Maybe just give us 30 seconds on this, and if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, this is the one that we, at the Board of Finance meeting down at the Fire Training Center, you might remember on this one, where again, they gave us 15 days to accept the $500,000 grant. So I appreciate all the boards listening and getting this through. And so anyway, on this one, it's the same information. Basically, we are now seeking the town share upon looking at DPW budget and economic development budget. We can try to piecemeal and come up with some of this, 111 or whatever it is, $1,000. But then basically, we're just taking away money that was kind of earmarked already for downtown and for some other neighborhoods. As I said before, a couple of years ago, this wasn't, on the chart because it wasn't, there wasn't a grant for it.
All right, thank you. Questions? Is that Mr. DeWitt? I can't tell.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to envision exactly where this is. I mean, I know Reef Road, but I guess my question is, there's in the last couple of years, we've been talking a lot about flooding downtown. Is this area part of this flooding? So should we, I guess the question is, should we be replacing sidewalks before we address the flooding issues? Because we certainly don't have any flood mitigation.
We are working concurrently. Some of that ARPA money has been set aside for that. We have received preliminary plans for that downtown flooding, and I might as well just give this a little preview of, there's like 5 different options. One of the options is $1 or $2 million, and one of them is $17 million, so it runs the gamut, and so we're going to try to decipher maybe which 1 or 2 to have them go with the final design on. So that's forthcoming on that.
But are
one.
these, is this area for this one project we're talking
We're
about? Is it
pretty close.
affected?
We're pretty close. The bullseye
Yeah.
is Reef Road and Sanford Street with Route 1 there.
Yeah, okay.
On this one, and I'll go through it quick. I made the assumption that everybody, remembered this or was there at that meeting. But this takes Round Hill Road from pretty much the corner of the university, Fairfield University, and connects it to the Post Road. That's one of the more popular sidewalks along the Fairfield University area. And then for Reef Road, obviously the sidewalk's, 40, 50 years old. Some of it's asphalt, some of it's concrete. It's a big mixture. I just drove by certain sections today. Some of them are dipped, some of them are cracked. It needs to be repaired. So to me, this was a home run for the town, because if we didn't get this grant, probably realistically within the next 2, maybe 3 years, we would have had to replace these anyway, if not even sooner, some of the more specific areas. So this was a home run, I thought, for the town. And the neighborhood for Round Hill Road, they have been waiting, even before COVID. We were always saying, okay, if we get some grant money, we'll include your neighborhood. And so they've been patiently waiting, and with good news, once it was in the news release and Brenda's letter, that we've gotten already 3 or 4 follow-ups. Oh, when are you going to start? When are you going to start? So this is very important to the neighborhoods, this project.
No, totally get it. My question is doing this going to impact the fact that we were doing these other things for the flood erosion? This is...
No, it's separate, because it's a different grant. The flooding would have been a different grant. This is the steep grant, and...
No, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about physically in that area. Are we going to replace?
But this is the area by the bus station.
Yeah.
It goes past the library, and it also, and then goes a little bit right before the brick walk. And then that's on the Post Road. I'm sorry, I confused them. So that's another steep project. That one's going out. That one's going out to bid. We had a pre-bid meeting today on that. I apologize. This steep grant is the Reef Road. No, this is further down by the police station. I described the Round Hill Road one for you.
And that's
for Reef Road. It's pretty much by the police station down towards Fairfield Beach Road. So the answer to your question is those sidewalks in that immediate area of the flooding, they're in pretty good shape right now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for Mr. DeWitt for that question. That's an important one, so appreciate it. Other board members have questions on this item? Okay, all right. Bill, Lower Wharf Fishing Pier. I see that this has a grant of $640,000. So that looks like is that also an approved grant?
No, this one is not. This is one of the ones that Jack had mentioned. This is not an approved grant. We're going to be applying for a grant on this one.
Okay, so we are authorizing the $800,000, and talk to us about, give us a brief overview, but is this one that we would go forward with without the grant?
That's the way that the bond resolution is written, so that we would authorize the full amount in the event that we don't get the get a grant for it, that it would go forward.
Yeah, I understand that from a mechanic standpoint, but will the town go forth and spend this $800,000 if a grant is denied, is my question. Is this a high priority project that we will do either way, or will we not do it if we don't get the grant money?
Our plan would be to do it either way, but I think we would, allow enough time. If we think there's some hope that we would get the grant, we would hold on until we could possibly get the grant.
Okay, so I just for the board's understanding, we should consider this an $800,000 project. Okay, Bill, do you want to quickly go through this one?
Yes, sure. The Harbor Commission has submitted preliminary design and permitting to the Connecticut DEP for the Lower Wharf improvements and the replacement of the fishing pier. The fishing pier was, a portion of it was left to decay in its natural state. for budgetary reasons years ago, and the westerly portion was just recently closed and actually damaged by the December nor'easter, which damaged the section of the pier, including the access ramp. So now it's completely closed. The fishing pier is a popular spot enjoyed by many members of the public. It is one of only 3 public access areas in Southport. The stone retaining walls need repointing and resetting, and some sections need replacement. The retaining walls is what holds up the lower wharf land, which, if left untreated over time, scour will continue to occur and sections of the park could be lost forever. And the DEP has made it clear when you lose land, you don't get to put it back. So that's something to consider. The proposal includes the repair and replacement of these stone retaining walls and the complete replacement of the fishing pier. The Harbor Management Commission has hired a consultant who's providing survey plans, permits, and specifications for the contract bid. The Harbor Management Commission is also seeking, they're going to investigate with the Port Authority and other grants as well to cover most of the project costs. Confirmation of these grant conditions will be needed before we go forward, but as Jared said, that we're going to, we're hopefully going to get a grant, but if not, then you have to, I guess, treat it as we don't get one. The other alternatives to the request is a possible reducing of the amount of work. So that might have been one of the examples of if we don't get the grant, perhaps we could reduce a little bit of the amount of work that's needed. Definitely the fishing pier, we could consider doing a partial. Obviously, the best plan is to have the whole thing. I do know that during popular fishing times and like blessing of the fleet and all that kind of stuff, it's highly utilized, and that's what we're going to go for. The average, I'm saying the fishing pier has an average service life of 30 years with routine maintenance. It's probably about 25 years for the decking and 40 to 50 years for the piles that are there. I do have a picture if anybody hasn't been to the site to see the pier of the condition, if it's needed. I have it here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if anyone's seen those. Somebody from the Harbor Management Commission emailed me some pictures, and it's definitely in tough shape. Certainly from a safety perspective. Questions from the board on this item? I do not see any. Oh, Mr. Curley.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a specific question about this particular item, but I do have a general question about all of the 6 projects that you presented from the engineering department. And the point that you raised last week, Mr. Schmidt, resonated with me regarding operational capacity. Do all of these projects have an owner? Is there an individual in town who's going to be responsible for each of these projects, or individuals?
I'll let Bill answer that question and how he divvies up the workload in that department.
Yeah, we have, I have 3 engineers in my staff. We would rotate them around. Like, for instance, the STEEP grant, we would not hire a consultant for that. It's pretty straightforward. The sidewalks, they don't involve state roads, so that one we would handle in-house. Some of the other ones, and certainly more expensive ones, where we'd have to have a consultant, and then we'd have a project manager, which would kind of be the liaison between the town and that consultant. So the major ones will have a consultant. The smaller ones we do in-house, if that answers your question.
It does. So certainly the consultant will help with the workload, but there's still got to be an owner within the town, right? Because the consultant's not necessarily...
Yeah, John Marsilio has made sure that I appoint a particular name to a project. So yes, that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Curley. Any other questions? from the board? Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Bye now.
Appreciate it. Okay, so next up on the list, we have fire and the pumper. The chief's here. Welcome. Turn it over to you for this item.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board. What you have before you is a request for the fire department for funding for a new fire pumper at $980,000. Just by way of background, we have reviewed this with the board in the past. Important to understand the sequencing of our purchasing of major pieces of rolling stock. We have created a matrix that goes back time immemorial, commitment by the department to the town that we will not produce or request major pieces of equipment to be replaced in back-to-back years. So every other year, we come before the board for funding. Another important consideration is the way that we cycle our apparatus through its various stages of life. We maintain our apparatus. The purchase of a fire pumper will provide reliable service to the town for 25 years, 12 and a half years at frontline service and 12 and a half years as an active reserve. Active reserves are put into frontline when equipment is out for repair or if we stand up additional units during a storm or another emergency. The other part of how we manage the fleet is that when new vehicles come in, they typically go to Station 1 or Station 2, the more active stations, and then those vehicles get relegated to Southport, Stratfield, or Greenfield Hill, so that a piece of vehicle is not having intensive use during its entire cycle at frontline. So the piece of equipment that we're requesting when it comes in, and it will be almost probably 16 months from now, if this is approved, it will go to Station 2. Station 2's vehicle will be transferred to Station 4 in Southport. Station 4 vehicle, which is a 2004, it's an anomaly because we did a refurb, extended its life after we had some rusting problems, and we got good value out of that investment. That engine 4 will become a frontline or a front reserve in serving the department. All of our equipment is bid through a national bid program, a bidding compact, and we have a great relationship with the manufacturer. As a matter of fact, in a recent visit to check on a vehicle under construction, there was only minor items in the final inspection. So we have great confidence in the equipment that we're getting and the quality of construction. And with that, I'll pause for questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Testani.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Chief, how are you? Forgive me, I may have asked this in the past. It was a similar question to what I asked Mr. Hurley. I have a couple. One is my questions on grants. Is it Fairfield eligible? Are any pumpers like this ever given any kind of state consideration?
We reviewed the grant criteria from the federal government, from FEMA, and we never qualify for grants for that for a couple of reasons. The demographics of the community, the wealth of the community, the age of our fleet. We do maintain a fleet that is in good shape, and we want to keep it that way. And they typically award grants for major pieces of apparatus to more distressed communities.
And in terms of the cost, with regard to, you mentioned other communities, is this comparable to what other towns our size have purchased in terms of their cost for a pumper of this magnitude?
Yeah, the industry has been going through a real struggle since COVID, and even before that. But you know, we're used to some typical cost inflation from year to year, and there has been a significant escalation far above the inflation rate. And that is industry-wide. As a matter of fact, I just conducted a survey when I saw the price, survey of all departments in the state of Connecticut that are career departments that are purchasing fire apparatus to determine exactly what you're asking. Is this within the realm of normal pricing for fire apparatus? And unfortunately, it is. And to the point of escalation, we have seen some manufacturers cancel competitively bid projects, cancel the projects without an additional $200,000 or $250,000 added to the price. So our manufacturer, Pierce Manufacturing, has not done that. Others have, and communities and then have to make the decision whether to proceed with the project or rebid it. So I'm confident that we are within the norm of current pricing, but it is very high.
And Chief, is this the max that it would cost? Is there a chance that it could be less?
No, we have great confidence because it is a national bid compact. We can see the prices, and with our relationship with the manufacturer as rep, we have, and year over year, been able to estimate the cost fairly closely. So we're confident that it will not exceed this number.
And the price escalations, did they attribute that to the supply chain issues, or what, some of the COVID leftovers, so to speak?
Yeah, in talking to people that deal with construction equipment, over-the-road trucks, the entire industry is experiencing the same kind of escalation. It is attributed to a couple of things. COVID and supply chain is a large one, but also there is a significant demand as the industry expands and contracts over time. During periods of contraction, you know, we see some manufacturers that are getting more of the business. Their prices tend to fluctuate to a greater degree.
So, and again, in terms of timing, and you may have said this, but just let me get it clear in my head. Let's get it approved. When would the pumper be ready for service?
So we would go through our design phase, which will take the better part of the spring. We'll present it to the purchasing department for bidding. The bids will be reviewed and probably midsummer, and then 400 days of construction is the current, so that's 14 months construction. So that brings us to the fall of '24 before we receive the vehicle.
And that's typical timing?
No, that's unfortunately, it used to be less than 365 days. It used to be 300 days for the issues that I raised earlier, but supply chain and just the consolidation of the market, you know, the sequencing of builds has extended the delivery dates, and that is what we're seeing for all manufacturers.
And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, one last one. In terms of priorities, if you had one vehicle to choose from in your entire fleet, would this be the one that you would want to add?
Yeah, the fire pumpers are the workhorse of the department. They run out of each station where we need those vehicles to maintain response time in those districts. And we need a reliable fleet. They have to start every time. They have to operate every time. They have to be flawless. They are well maintained by the personnel assigned to them, as well as the maintenance division. So despite all that, they need to be replaced in a regular schedule so they don't fall in or out of that norm and that expectation.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I just want to thank you again. This is the program, we talked about this program for years. You guys implemented it. We appreciate it. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the model for, the police department too is doing this. This is the kind of tact we want to be on. We don't want to do this every year, unlike the police cars. But when you're spending $1 million, every other year. So I just want to tell you, I appreciate that you're following through with what you offered to do, and I'm going to support this, I know, so thank you.
Thank you. And let me just say that the only way that that works is to maintain them in the way that I just described, the deputy chief, assistant chief in charge of apparatus, as well as the maintenance division, work as a team to make sure that we protect the investment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Stark?
3 real quick ones. Typical useful life is between 20 and 25 years, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, what do you do with an old fire truck?
So when they reach the end of life, we have a vehicle that will be surplus in 1999. So when they reach that age, they have little or no value. There's no resale value. And then we work with the purchasing department to surplus them and other equipment when they have enough from various departments to make that type of sale worthwhile and worth their time. But we surplus equipment so that we're not maintaining an old fleet of broken down equipment. We salvage everything that we can off them before we put them out for surplus, but they don't have any residual value by the time we're retiring them.
Great. And then the last question. Well, there's another pumper on the waterfall for 2 years later, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stark. Other questions from the board? I don't see anybody. Okay. Just one clarification for the chief. I know you said fall 2024 is roughly the time frame in which we expect to get this. When do we pay for it?
So we work with the finance department in years when it's favorable for the town. We prepay anywhere from 50 to 100% of the cost of the vehicle. And if there is a favorable return on that funds, and that is a decision that is made by the finance department, and we take advantage of that. If the proposal provides a good opportunity for us, we'll take advantage of it. And that is done at the time that we go out to bid and get those estimates and projections from the manufacturer.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is it's in our waterfall, it's by virtue of the fact that we're approving it now, it sort of de facto goes into our cash flow for next year, which is meaning we would bond for it in July. But we won't actually have the equipment until, the fiscal 25. And so that's why I was asking. So it sounds like you're saying there may be, so if is there an opportunity to prepay this and get a discount or something? I'm not sure I'm following. And maybe that's a question for Jared.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Yes, there is a discount of some $30,000, $40,000, depending on interest rates. We have realized that kind of savings. I don't expect that will be the circumstance with this vehicle.
Okay, yeah, I thought we might have to pay up front, given that it's a custom vehicle anyway. But I guess my question is, and maybe again for Jared, I just wanted to make sure that this is an item that we will be bonding for in the upcoming year. based on the projected cash flow. We're going to pay for this, we're going to bond for this item in fiscal '24 because we're going to pay for this in fiscal '24?
Based on what we know right now, we'll look at it again before we go out to issue, just like every other project. And if, you know, I think we'll know more at that time and have a conversation with the chiefs and make a decision then.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it'd be helpful to, again, to get these updates as we go along, because I think as we all saw, our bonding number's pretty low this upcoming year. So this is $1 million item, and it's just helpful to know where we stand and what we're actually bonding vis-a-vis what we're approving. Any other questions on this?
Madam Chair, maybe while we're doing that, we can double check FEMA, see if they want to be generous and give us a grant for $980,000. That'd be nice, right? It's worth double checking.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right. All right. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
All right. So we're about to move on to Parks and Rec, and Anthony's face appeared on the screen instead of the blank box. Welcome.
My alarm appropriately. It was perfect.
All right. Thanks for being here. So we have 3 Parks and Rec projects on the list. You want to just take us through these in order?
Sure. So Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation, and good evening, everybody. First project before you is an upgrade to our H. Smith Richardson driving range. Looking to do half our upgrade, phasing this into 2 phases. First phase is $275,000. With this improvement, with this money, we plan to improve the turf matting, add covered tops to each bay, add some heating for an extended season, hopefully replace the current building that's on site, replace the current ball machine to an automated machine, potentially add top tracers, and then start designing the functional short game area, which would likely be phase 2. Happy to take any questions.
All right, Mr. Curley.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Anthony. One of the issues with the driving range for years has been the netting. I didn't see anything about the netting in the write-up or in what you described. Is the plan to also address the netting with this phase 1?
So the netting's actually being addressed in our operating budget.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stark.
The 14 points says that the revenue from the range is $150,000. Do you happen to know roughly what the operating expenses are?
Off the top of my head, no, but they're not a large part of our operation up there, so it's nowhere near the expense.
Nowhere near the revenue, you mean?
Nowhere near, yeah, it's late. Nowhere near the revenue.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then I would comment that I see people using that range after it closes just about every night during warmer weather and even during the winter. So I think the idea that the revenue will grow if you do this has got pretty solid justification. I wish we could guess the magnitude of it, but I know that's very difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Mr. Curley.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I know, just to address Mr. Stark's question about the revenue, one of the things that I would expect with the covered and heated bays, that the revenue certainly should increase. As a point of comparison, similar sized range down in Stamford, granted different setup, but at Sterling Farms, I believe the revenues are over $1 million a year. So I'm not suggesting that we should expect that kind of number with this improvement, but I do expect the trend would move in the right direction.
I don't know. I think Anthony's got to put $1 million in his budget next year if we approve this.
Whatever you guys want to do.
We have to get a lot more population as well.
Okay, other questions from the board on this
I have a
item?
question.
Ms.
Hi, I
Martin?
have a question. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. I have a question, especially about the potential extended season with the heat, adding the heat, and also with the increased revenues, meaning increased numbers of people, obviously, going to driving range. Have you considered at all any neighborhood concerns in terms of increased traffic to that area? I remember when this was I remember back with the Hoyden Hill kind of discussion with neighbors and having the driving range up there and a lot of concern about traffic. Do you have any thoughts on that, especially as a follow-up to Mr. Curley's comment about $1 million in revenue? That's a lot of people going up there. So can you comment on that for us?
Sure. There's 12 houses on that street. Right now, the biggest draw up there is Little League girls softball. And honestly, after the first year, maybe the second year of that field being in place, so 2014, 2015, we haven't really gotten any complaints on the amount of traffic when they're hosting tournaments or even when they host Ludlow games. So I'm not overly concerned about the off-season traffic.
Okay, and then just remind us what the phase 2 is. Explain that a little bit more. I know you briefly mentioned it, but what does that entail, and what are the potential implications?
Yeah, so phase 2, what we'd be looking to do is potentially add a second deck on top of the bays. So we would double the number of bays that are there. But more importantly, create a functional short game area where people can, bunkers and stuff like that, and hopefully increase revenue through lessons and other items that we'd be able to do there.
Do you anticipate, again, I don't use the course myself, do you anticipate people taking a golf cart from the main part of Smith Richardson up to that area, following their game or prior to their game, or would they be parking up there separately, do you think?
So most people do drive up there separately. There are the occasional people who drive a cart up there, but primarily it's people driving up there. That's one of the biggest design flaws with our golf course, unfortunately, is not having the clubhouse next to or near the driving range.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Back to the room. I can't see the faces. Any other questions from the board on this one?
I don't see any.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Okay, Mr. Calabrese, do you want to move on to the Fairfield Woods tennis courts?
Yep. All right, Fairfield Woods tennis courts, we are looking to replace them. So we're requesting $522,000 to replace the current courts that are there with post-tension concrete. These courts were rebuilt in 2004. In 2019, we resurfaced them. They are at the end of their useful life. And as you guys know, because you've been approving our tennis court renovations over the last several years, post-tension concrete is the way that we've been moving with our tennis courts. We get a 20-year guarantee on cracks and a 10-year guarantee on all lines. So while they're a little more expensive up front, they pay for themselves over time. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions from the board? John, can you?
Yeah, Mr. Stark has a question.
I'm going to rope the pickleball into this question too. I play tennis, and I'm terrible at it, but I play, and I never have to wait to find a place to play tennis in town, which is great because there's so many courts. And I was just wondering, how have you thought about repurposing some of them to pickleball, or what's the demand level like respectively? Do you think you got the right number of each right now?
We don't have the right number of each, that's for sure. We are severely lacking pickleball courts, as you heard from some of our residents earlier tonight. I think we have the right number of tennis courts in town. The tennis courts are consistently booked. Now, however, I don't have any way to tell when they're booked by pickleball players. There's some that are double lines. So there are pickleball players that will book tennis courts to play pickleball. But I do feel that we have the right number of tennis courts. It was a real fight to repurpose Tungus Hill to pickleball. The tennis community was up in arms about that, and that was the least utilized tennis court that we had. And now it's probably the most used court location. But our master plan that we just presented to the board a few weeks ago did have several locations that we were looking to add additional pickleball courts on. So tonight, the next project I'm talking about is Hill, and that does take into consideration adding 2 additional courts there.
Okay, Mr. Stark, any follow-ups on that?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions from the board on this? Okay, just quickly for Mr. Calabrese, I recall that we approved, I think it was Dwight tennis courts not that long ago, and I think they were maybe completed recently, and this $500,000 number rings a bell to me in terms of the cost. What did Dwight end up being in terms of the final cost? Is it consistent with what you're estimating here?
It is consistent. They haven't been completed yet, but that number was, I believe, off the top of my head, 554. It's a different layout, but yes, these prices are very similar in price.
Okay, so these are $500,000 projects generally as we're going forward for the, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. If there are no other questions from board members, we can move on to Tungus Hill.
All right, everybody's favorite one, Tungus Hill pickleball courts. So this is pretty much the same situation as the Fairfield Woods tennis courts. These were bituminous courts that are at the end of their useful life. They were repurposed in 2014, but they weren't rebuilt. So they weren't ground up and completely rebuilt. So they're more than the 12-year lifespan at this point. I want to say it was 2007 that they were actually rebuilt, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So we're requesting $575,000 to replace the current 4 pickleball courts that are at Tungus Hill and adding 2 additional pickleball courts. The addition of the 2 will likely have to go through additional permitting through planning and zoning and conservation, inland wetlands. There may be some additional hurdles with those because those are brand new construction as opposed to replacing what's currently there. I'll likely phase this in. I'll do this one most likely in 2 phases as well. We'll try to get the original 4 court as quickly as we can, those back online, and then work on the other 2. So we're all clear on the plan.
Okay. But do you expect all of this to be done? I don't know. How did the 2 phases space out in terms of timing? Is this all in fiscal 24 or would it extend beyond that?
No, it should be in fiscal 24. A post-tension concrete tennis court or pickleball court typically takes about 16 weeks to do. So there may be some overlap. We're going to start the other one at 16. The countdown will start for the 16 weeks on the first 4. I'm not 100% sure that we'll have to go through all 16 weeks before we start the other 2. We might get to week 8 and be able to start. So, but I don't see them extending into fiscal 25.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board? John, you have to help me out here.
Mr. Testani has a question. Hey, Anthony, how are you? Just on the pickleball, obviously you referenced the residents that were here. I'm just trying to sort of dovetail off Lori's questions. The timing of this, I'm trying to understand what happened because there was quite a bit of concern over the existing conditions. Just on my own, I see what you outlined in terms of what was maintained, for lack of a better word, over the years. It's a little hard to understand why it had gotten to this level. Could it have been approached a year ago, 2 years ago? I mean, to get to a point where we have residents going out of town to get to pickleball courts is hard to understand, to be honest. So can you help me to understand that?
Yeah, trust me, I'm as embarrassed by our facilities throughout town as any of those pickleball players. And I'm not talking just pickleball courts or tennis courts. I mean, our facilities, the maintenance on our facilities have been deferred year after year after year. Could this have come forward 10 years ago? Yeah, it should have. It probably should have. Could it have come forward last year? Absolutely. Unfortunately, and you guys know better than anybody, with so many projects that this town has, we've got to try to prioritize, the ones that need to be done first. And unfortunately, the pickleball courts weren't in bad shape a year and a half ago. We've got tree roots that have come up underneath where they are now. So when we get in there and rip those courts up, we've got to do a little work there, get rid of some of the trees so we don't run into this issue down the road as well. So there's some other issues there. I can't speak to what other towns do and how they are able to fly through the process and bypass certain things that we can't do. But it's unfortunate our residents are leaving town to go play other places.
Right, and moving forward, what can be done to circumvent that? Is it more maintenance? Is it more attention to detail? Is it more forecasting with regard to you reference not just courts, I'm just saying overall different facilities that under your purview as the recreation department manager, or director, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's a great question, Jack. And I think the capital planning workshop that we just did for the past 8 or 9 months and outlining projects that we have over the next 5 or 6 years, I think is essential to what we need to do. And we can't be leaving projects off that, department heads are saying, hey, this is something we need to put on here. Okay, and then you guys decide, well, it's not going to be this year, but, we can put it on 2 years from now. And, it's kind of just like it was just saying, where you've got another one coming up in 2 years. You pass that one, he's in a jam at that point. So it's just forecasting. It really is. It's just forecasting and not leaving things off that waterfall chart.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani. I actually have a comment to follow up on what Mr. Testani said. I think, and maybe this is a question for Jared, but if we've got, it seems to me we have some room in our bonding capacity over this next year. I mean, we talked in the capital project workshop about potentially, accelerating some items so that we would avoid, peaks and valleys in our debt service, and maybe that could serve to smooth things out. And I know that one of the challenges you mentioned was, operational management of, many different projects. I'm not sure about some of these Parks and Rec projects, but, maybe there's an opportunity there. If they can be managed, that these are, potentially some of the ones that, that we can reconsider in terms of timing. And again, the reason I say that is not to add in total to the project list, but I think the timing is important. And, if there's an opportunity to accelerate this so that we can, maybe smooth out that debt service, I don't know what Anthony's operational capacity is to manage more projects, but if it's about the finances, that's the reason we do the plan, is to reevaluate these things. So if some of the other ones we're talking about tonight come off, I know some of them are questionable. I would just encourage us to, continue to look at this update over time so that we, we can deal with these things, if we want to. So I'll just throw that out there.
I can tell you that with regard to this particular issue, we have been having more conversations about this and trying to find more opportunities in more spaces to build more courts. And, we'll continue to look into that. with regard to the capital plan overall, you see it. I mean, there's, yes, there may be some lighter years, but there are a lot of projects on the horizon that we're going to have to take care of. So we're always looking for opportunities where there is maybe some room where we can do other things that are priorities. And like I said, the pickleball is one of those activities that we flagged. But you know, we're trying to balance things here.
Yeah, specifically, just, you know, you're right. We obviously have some years where we're close to approaching where we want to be in terms of our debt service numbers. But you know, if the objective is to sort of smooth out, you know, those debt service numbers over time, and there's an opportunity here, it sounds like, and I don't, you know, again, I don't do Anthony's job, but it sounds like the impediment there is more around the money than around the capacity to execute. So I would just, you know, say that, you know, as we move forward, those, you know, there might be some opportunities there. Nothing to decide at the moment, but it's an observation. So, are there any other questions on pickleball? I think I think nobody's got to be convinced of the community support for this item, but any other questions on the project itself? Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Calabrese, thank you. Appreciate your presentation, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I've got one more, so I'm going to stick around. I'm going to turn my camera off.
Wait. Oh, are you in the ARPA? Is that it?
I am.
Oh, sorry about that. All right. Okay, I would move you up, but we've got to vote on this resolution first, and the poor Fairfield Public Schools people have been sitting here, so. All right, so we're gonna move on then. So that takes care of the town projects, and just as a note for the board, so if you're on Exhibit A to the original backup, I think a revised one was posted, but just for the record, once that second project, the Greens Farm Bridge construction, the one that we is not before us tonight, is excluded from that, that subtotal on the town side is $4,473,298. So when we amend this resolution, we will also amend these numbers and that subtotal in total. All right, with that being said, we can move on to the Fairfield Public Schools projects. And I apologize, the reason I call on Mr. Mottola occasionally is because when we switch speaker, my view of the boardroom ends up being in a tiny little box, and that's where it is now. So until somebody starts talking, I can only see a tiny little box. So I'm guessing Angelus is at the table. I don't know who wants to start with this, but you can go ahead.
Go ahead. Good evening, everyone. So you have 5 projects before you. If it's okay with the board, I'll loop the first 3, which are similar projects because of the time. These are 3 vestibule projects. These are entranceway, safety and security upgrades. We don't really go into detail with those types of projects in a public meeting, but I can tell you that they are recommended by the PD and by the state as the newest and greatest for entranceways for school buildings. Any specific questions about those I could answer, possibly?
Thank you, Mr. Papageorge, and you have spoken to this board about these before. In fact, I think even at the quarterly meeting or one of the previous times you presented your waterfall, we talked about these vestibule projects in more detail. Any questions from the board on these projects or the associated grants? Okay, maybe everyone's just tired. You can keep going.
Okay, so the second project you have next project you have before you is our Ward Boiler project. This is a request for the $25,000 for the design work of these boilers. The boilers themselves were replaced there's 3 of them. They were replaced in 2006, 2012, 2015. At the time of the replacement of the boilers, the burners were not replaced because of the condition. So at this point, we feel that it is vital to get the burners replaced on there. Again, this is the $25,000 that we would need to do the design work to come up with the best way to move forwards with these types of burners.
So just to clarify, Mr. Papa George, the 25,000, we've got the entire amount on the project schedule, the 343,862, right? So the design and the actual project cost.
That is in your backup, the full amount, my understanding is, but our intent was the $25,000 for this year, and the actual project would not go out for bond until the 25 fiscal year.
Okay, so that's helpful. So from a cash flow perspective and from our waterfall schedule, it would only be the $25,000 that's bonded for fiscal '24. For the
Correct.
design cost. Okay, thank you. All right, but you're asking that we authorize the 343, similar to how we did it with the air conditioning.
So the air conditioning, we did ask for the full amount out because of state reimbursement and state grants. We're required to get authorization for the full amount prior to moving forward for state applications.
Okay, but we do have the full amount here. I just want to make sure that's the intent. We're being asked to authorize the full amount for the boilers.
Right, we're authorizing the full amount so that they can start spending immediately to do the design work, but we would not issue bonds related to the work to be done until next year.
Okay. No, that's helpful. And I guess my only point there is I don't know how that flowed into the waterfall schedule, but hopefully the way it flowed in is we've just got $25,000 going in to the current year, and the remainder goes into fiscal '25 because that's what will drive the debt service.
That's the way it is.
So maybe, okay, thank you. And then, do any board members have questions on this item? Okay.
Madam Chair, just Jeff
All right.
Peterson with the Board of Ed. Just to be very clear, I want to be very clear that because this is design work that we are asking for funding for, that we may have theoretically have to come back for some kind of clarification if we get a number ultimately that is larger than what is on the appropriation list tonight. Because the Board of Ed has approved the numbers as you see them in your backup, but as we know with design work, those numbers, final numbers, could potentially change.
Got it. Okay. Jenny, Mr. DeWitt, do you have a follow-up on that?
I just want to clarify, though, these are the numbers that are in Mr. Papa George's waterfall. I mean, they match to the dollar, right?
Yes.
So I understand your concern. You're not helping to sell this, I got to say, but just as a side note. But I understand your concern, right? The design, the way we've been structuring a lot of the Board of Ed projects is we do some design work up front, then we get a better number. You're saying that this 25,000 might yield a better number, but it might be a bigger number.
That's true. I just want to be very clear because the board in its October vote, our board approved the design work only. We approved the backup that you see here with the numbers that you see here, which match the numbers on the waterfall. I just want to be very, very clear that there could be a follow-on ask to this. And I'm glad, just as an addition, to clarify that the $750,000 that we're adding to this appropriation that we did not ask for in this current round is not going to mess up our cash flow, which we measured out very carefully from year to year. So as long as we're clear and you're clear and we're clear that that $750,000 extra will be applied to fiscal year 25's cash flow, then I have no issue. I was surprised to see the full number in this appropriation backup.
I was surprised to see it as well. In fact, that was why I raised my hand initially until Madam Chairman talked about the two numbers being together. But much to Mr. Papa George's credit, in the Board of Ed's credit, your workflow or your money flow is accurately portrayed in your waterfall.
Yes, and again, and thank you for your concern, and I apologize, but there was some chatter in the back of the room as we were trying to work this out while you were discussing other matters, so I apologize for that. But yes, all the numbers match, the waterfall, the cash flow.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Yeah, just for everyone's clarification, and I don't know if everyone remembers the Board of Ed waterfall schedule from last week, but they did a really nice job breaking out. So there were two versions. There was a version that indicated sort of date of authorization, when projects would come before us in which fiscal year. Then there was a version 2 that showed the cash flow of when these projects would actually be executed. And that second version is important because the cash flow is what's supposed to flow into the bonding schedule. And we typically have a lot of we approve something 1 year, but it doesn't get bonded till a year later. So it really distorts our waterfall. So I think Angelus and the team did a nice job breaking that out. And sometimes the authorization, like with the air conditioning, they were asking for it all up front, regardless of when the cash flow is going to happen. It sounds like, am I understanding correctly that the intent was really not to do that here, that the intent was only to ask for the design money now? And then even though you had an estimate for the whole project in your waterfall, you were going to come back next year for the remaining authorization?
That was our intent, because as you all know, the numbers these days are so versatile and could go up, down. Particular project quotes we're getting at these days, some are 10 days held, some are 30 days held. So we didn't want to put forth a number that we couldn't stand behind.
So one of the alternatives would be to put that 25,000 in their operating budget. Because we don't typically make authorizations for bonding on the capital plan for $25,000. And so that's why it's all together here as one.
Yeah, I hear you. I do think it's consistent that we bond design costs separately, though. These happen to be lower. I guess I just don't want us, I want to remember this conversation because, there'll be a lot of consternation next year if, if people forget this and then the authorization increases, and everyone wants to know why. And the reason is because we went ahead and asked for an authorization on something that we were not really prepared to do. So, what was the design amount on the Naps Highway and the tennis and basketball courts? How much is that?
30,416.
Yeah, was this clear to the Board of Selectmen last night? The discussion, they did approve this entire,
It was all in the backup, so it should have been clear, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if there's if the conversation happened similar to what we're having now. I hate to ask the board to approve an authorization that you didn't intend to ask us to approve. It sounds like we combined, we added something on here that you didn't intend for us to approve, so I'm not sure why we're approving it versus just the design costs.
Well, Madam Chair, just from the board's perspective, we're really looking for guidance from you on this. This was not as we expected, but as we mentioned, these are the numbers that were on the waterfall. These are the numbers that we have been using for planning. These are the numbers that were in our backup at the Board of Ed table that we approved in October. If your guidance is that this is an appropriate way to proceed, that's fine. It's just not what we anticipated asking for. But I'd be seeking your guidance, and I'm just trying to be very upfront with why we're doing it in this order.
Angelus and I had a conversation about this, and we talked about the alternative of putting this into their operating budget, and that obviously it wasn't going to happen.
So we did talk about it, and this was the way to do it.
Mr. DeWitt, do you have a comment?
Well, first off, I want to comment on Mr. Schmidt's comment about the Board of Selectmen meeting. If the Board of Selectmen got the same backup I got, it's not in there. I did the math in my head and said, oh, somebody decided to combine it. If the Board of Ed was not there or Mr. Papa George wasn't there, I'm sure they didn't get the conversation we're having. That's one. I have the same comment that we don't bond $25,000 for, so it might have been a good option to put it into the operating budget. Because you're doing the same thing in this Naps Highway, tennis basketball court. Well, so my question is this: are there any other budget implications from the Board of Ed side due to the fact that you're renovating, you're getting this money a little bit early? Is there something in the budget that you might have planned for the 2025 budget that coincided with you doing the real work rather than, I just want to make sure that this doesn't affect your overall budget if you get this money too early. And I know you're not getting it, bonded, but I think you know what I mean, right?
I mean, I would just say from the board standpoint that we tried very hard. We have our facilities committee on the board. We worked with, through the town process to try to be very explicit about what we were looking for and when we were looking for it, and in terms of cash flow, because we were given that theoretical cap for how much we would be able to plan each year.
Yeah.
So I mean, we may have decided differently if we had this conversation earlier, I guess. But and in terms of getting the money sooner, is it my understanding that we will actually bond this and receive funds? No.
No,
right?
yeah, right.
So right.
Yeah. No, so exactly. So my perspective as a Board of Finance guy, and the level that I know we're bonding at in this fiscal year of '24, I don't want to reduce those two numbers. That's just one of 9 opinion. From a Board of Ed perspective, I could see how you guys might want this to break out and do exactly what your plan said, because I really appreciate the fact that you have a very detailed plan. So, I mean, my recommendation would be to leave it as it is, the bonding, as long as you guys can, absorb this yourself and keep your waterfall the right way, not the way it's portrayed here.
I certainly, I don't want to make things any more difficult. What we really want to be here is completely transparent, and to Madam Chair's point, if we have this conversation in a year from now, I do want to remember that we kind of covered this ground. So as long as we're receiving some assurance that we are not getting money early and that it's messing up the flow for out years in our planning, I don't see any problem in doing what's in the backup now. Again, it was a surprise to me. And having had conversations, I just want to be extremely clear about what we're doing and why.
It's an election year. You know who's going to be sitting here next year?
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. And that's why I'm raising it, because I just, it feels a little bit funny to me, I'll be honest. And frankly, there are other items on this schedule. I mean, I know it's not on our list tonight, but for example, we had Camden Street properties, right? 642,000. After a grant, it ends up being 40,000, and we're proposing to bond that. So we are bonding small items on occasion, and ultimately,
No,
we don't bond the
Madam Chair, that
individual.
got
I mean,
pulled.
we
That's
look at
not
this
on
in the
there.
aggregate, and we bond an amount, right? That's
Camden Street is not on there. It got pulled off.
I know. I said, that's what I said to preface my statement. I know it's not on there, but on the schedule, something like that, which is listed as a capital non-recurring item, has a net amount of $40,000. So that happened to be the first one I looked at, but there is some precedent there. And my concern is that, whenever anybody has to come back for a revised authorization on bonding, it always ends up being a big deal. And I just don't want that to happen, because we decided that we wanted to bond, authorize a preliminary amount that these guys actually weren't ready to ask for. That's all.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Hi. So as you know, the board and Mr. Papa George and the administration took great pains to plan things out very explicitly and to provide the request of the town and of this board to have the cash flow. So as you know that we've been trying to do projects spread out where we get the design information one year so that we get really good numbers, then do the amount. What I would hate to see, though, on the flip side of this conversation is that there's some sort of a penalty for doing that way in terms of delaying approvals. If we come back next year, we've done the design work, we're ready tonight, but maybe we're not. Things look differently to the town next year. So I just want to look into the future on the other side of that conversation. So this was a bit of a surprise, understand that. But to be cognizant of the flip side of what could potentially happen as well. So just want to make that point that we're trying to do things in a certain way for you guys. And if that means that there should be some guidance that if it's under a certain amount, put it in the operating going forward, and we can have that conversation and have it for, in the future. But just would hate to come back again next year and have to start over again as well. So if it works for everyone, that's great. If it doesn't, we'll do whatever is preferable to the board.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I guess I'm just, listen, I'll just step back here. I want to move on, but, we're authorizing this amount for bonding now, and it's not going to be bonded this year because we're not going to spend the money this year. So I just don't know why we're doing this. I appreciate what Mr. DeWitt said, but the cash flow is not happening this year. We're not certain about the amount. Doesn't really make sense to me. If there's a significant concern about bonding or listing just the design costs because that's not, appropriate for what we do, then, I'll accept that. But, I just don't think this is the right approach because the whole point of this, of approving these, is supposed to be approving things that we're going to bond in the short term. And, I don't know, this one just seems, seems like we're going about it in a little bit of a convoluted way. So I heard Mr. DeWitt's comments. I don't know if anyone else has any objection to doing this. I mean, I'll support it if the board wants to support it, but, hopefully we can, I think we should have I agree with what Ms. Jacobson and Mr. Peterson said. We should have a conversation, some clarity on these items going forward. Is everybody on the board okay with leaving this as it is? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. All right. Okay, so let's move forward then. And, I can't make any promises for who will be sitting here next year, Mr. Peterson, but I won't hold it against you if the number's wrong.
That's
The
entirely
number
fair.
turns out to be higher.
We appreciate the conversation and apologies for the confusion, but I'm glad we set it all out.
Yeah, no, thank you again. All right, did we actually talk about the tennis courts? I sort of lost track here. Angeles.
We did not. I could briefly go through them if you like. So this is a $30,000 request for the design work for the Naps Highway tennis courts. These are 4 courts built in the bituminous courts built in the 60s. They had a resurface in 2007, and they are well beyond their life expectancy. They are cracked and not in good condition. Accompanied with that is a small bituminous basketball court next to them that we would work into the design and build out of them. And as I said last night and promised, we would also look at the potential of adding a pickleball court or two to the area depending on space availability.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this item? Mr. Curley.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarifying question in terms of the construction method. Is it consistent with what Parks and Rec is doing? They're using, I forget the terminology that they use, but basically.
Post-tension concrete.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we will work, we said last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting that we will work with Parks and Rec so that when they go out to bid for their next project, we may be able to get some combined services and bid them together.
And did I also infer from how you described that is that you're really looking for the $30,000 for the design work, and all the rest of the funding would occur in the subsequent year. So we're in the same situation.
The project would be a 25 project.
Madam Chair, just one follow-up on that. This sounds similar to me to what we ran into last year when we started the discussions on a lot of the air conditioning work and the HVAC work. And the parallel that I'm drawing was that we knew that those projects were going to be spread out over many years, but yet you put forth the full dollar amounts as best guess as of the time. And the primary driver for that, if I remember correctly, was that you needed to show the state that you had approval for the funding so that you could then apply to the state for grants or other compensation.
That is correct. The state wants to see that the funding is approved and available, and this town is going to stand behind it before they will look at projects and accept them.
So this is a little different because neither of these projects have grants associated with them, but absent the grant fact pattern, the rest of the facts are the same. They basically sized out as best they can. They're looking to spend some portion of that estimate in one fiscal year and then follow on afterwards. And granted, as the design work takes place, the estimates may change. That's the caution, right? But otherwise, it seems that the fact pattern's similar absent the grant. So I'm comfortable proceeding because there is precedent for what we've done. And I understand the point that everyone has made that we are disconnecting the cash timing from the authorization, but at least we are putting our arms around what we think our best guess as of now that the total spend will be.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. And yeah, I understand all that. I think my concern is more that we seem to have a disconnect where, you know, the Board of Ed representatives in Angeles were here before us expecting to us to have one thing approved, and we're actually approving something else. So it seems like we had some wires crossed, but we can move on.
I just want to say that Angeles and I talked about this, and I told him that this is what we were planning to do. There should have been there wasn't a disconnect between the administration and the Board of Education. There may have been a disconnect between members of the Board of Education and the Superintendent's office.
Madam Chair, I'm going to yes vote for the resolution. Call into question, please.
We're going to move on. Okay, so that is our project list. Thank you, Angeles. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Appreciate it. Okay. I don't see, all right, so we took public comment at the beginning of this. I don't see anything else. So I guess we can move forward to a vote. So first, I'll make a motion to amend the amount of the resolution. And again, this is for the purpose of removing the Greens Farm Bridge construction project in the amount of $432,600. So this will change the language or the number in the resolution on page 195 of the backup as follows. It will now be a resolution appropriating $7,255,022 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. The new amount will replace the amount currently in the title of the resolution on page 95, as well as in paragraphs 1 and 2 of the resolution. And Exhibit A will be amended to remove what's currently line 2 for the Greens Farm Bridge construction project. So the appropriation subtotal for town projects is $4,473,298, and the grand total is $7,255,022. Can I have a second for the amendment? Seconded by Mr. Testani. Thank you. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I see everyone. It is unanimous 8-0. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, so So now we can move to vote on the resolution as amended. All those in favor of the resolution appropriating $7,255,022 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects as set forth on Exhibit A as amended, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. It is unanimous 8-0. Thank you. All right. With that, we can move on to item 6. To hear, consider, and adopt a resolution appropriating $760,000 for the costs related to uses of the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund and the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. The full resolution is included in the posted backup on page 283. And this item was approved by the Board of Selectmen last night. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Testani. Okay. All right, so the $760,000, that's the subject of this resolution, is made up of 5 projects included in another Exhibit A in the backup. This one is on page 284. And it starts with fire. Chief McCarthy or whoever is going to talk about the first 2 projects, fire station rehabilitation for $50,000 and shift commander vehicle replacement for $150,000.
Madam Chair, can I ask you a question about the actual bond resolution first?
Yes.
So last week, again, with our waterfall, the top 4 projects on here were in the waterfall, but there is no vehicle replacement for fire, that extra $60,000. So where did that come from?
This was an item that we added as we were looking at the capital outlay for the fire department. And this was on there, and then thought that this, it would be a good opportunity to put this into the ARPA funding, as there's a, sort of a theme of public safety in the ARPA projects that we're funding. So thought it would be a good opportunity to take something out of their operating budget and appropriately use the ARPA money. And admittedly, it was added, and it was kind of a last-minute add. So there it is.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, because this is, again, from last week. And I'm all for taking, using ARPA money and reducing the chief's budget. It's just that I'm concerned that that wasn't even in here. So that was going to go, and you were getting ready to present this in your operating budget in another couple weeks. So that's why this didn't show up in the waterfall? All right, well, that's a better answer. So, all right, thanks.
Chief, what vehicle is that? 60,000.
Okay, so why don't we, let's go down the list in order if everybody doesn't mind. And I think part of what's important to understand about things like this that are being taken out of the operating budget is, whether they're recurring items and, et cetera, because I know that we've tried not to create cliffs in our operating budgets for these sorts of things, and recurring capital we try to keep in the operating budget. So why don't we just go down the list and talk about each one of these, and then we can ask questions on each one, if that's okay with everyone. So maybe let's start with fire station rehabilitation.
Good evening again. So this is an additional $50,000 to the $250,000 was previous approved ARPA funding as the source for station rehabilitation. We have been working over the past several years with support from the town to renovate various elements of our 5 fire stations. There are portions of the stations that are maintained by DPW, particularly the envelope, Some of the internal systems, we have taken those projects on with funding such as this. We've done bathrooms at Station 2 on Jennings Road. We're currently in the bid phase for bathrooms at Station 1. We've done overhead doors, which will be completed this spring, as well as station exhaust systems. And as we continue to go through these very old buildings, the youngest was built in 1974, and the oldest over 100 years ago. The bathrooms that we're working on were original to those buildings in 1974 and 1954. So these are very needed repairs, and we just are plodding through the process, and we requested an additional $50,000 just because of the cost of these construction projects exceeded the previous authorization.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mottola?
Hey, Chief, who's managing these construction projects?
So it really is a partnership. The Deputy Chief, Karen Dunn, Assistant Chief Skylar Sherwood, and James Ryan are the team that manages them. It's good to have in-house talent that is maintaining day-to-day, but we really rely heavily on James Ryan's expertise, and particularly when we are struggling with a concept or a process or value engineering issues with various elements, and he has been very helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Other questions on this item? Okay, and forgive me, I think I'm losing track a little bit here, but just, and you probably said this, but so the $50,000, what is the total, this adds to the total cost of the what is the total cost that we've devoted thus far to this project?
$250,000 has been earmarked from ARPA funds previously.
Okay, and there was no money other than ARPA funds that went toward the fire station rehabilitation?
So there were three phases. So there was a capital authorization allocation for and they were each 250. There was 250 from capital, and then there were two 250s from ARPA.
So 250 for capital, two 250s for ARPA, and then this one?
And now this 50 added on, right.
Okay, so just, all right, so $800,000 in total is the amount that's been, is the total authorization to date on the fire station rehabilitation?
Assuming this passes, yes.
Okay, and I just, and is this, and a question for, so how, Chief, how far does this get us? Like, does this get you all the way that you need to be there, where you need to be, or, you know, do we have another 800,000 coming down the road? And again, I apologize if we may have gone through this in one of our previous meetings, but I just don't remember.
So this, when we started this process, we forecasted out 5 years of funding at $250,000 a year. And the very first project that we were doing were bathrooms. We had good estimates pre-COVID, and then the very first project exceeded, for one station, the entire estimate for 3 stations. So it caused us to rethink the entire process. We divided those projects up, delayed them to try to get more favorable estimates and bids if we delayed. And we are out to bid, as I said, for Station 1 bathrooms, so we'll test that waters this spring. We have a number of projects still left to do. We need an elevator at Station 1 on Reef Road. We need to renovate a portion of the first floor. Kitchen and storage areas need to be added, kitchen renovated, storage room added, second floor admin offices, And that is to the point that we have projected. So to answer your question, yes, there's another $800,000. And we're approaching this as what can we accomplish in a given year, and grouping projects by type, so we're not scattering, you're not doing one station at a time of dissimilar projects. We're doing bathrooms, we're doing overhead doors, and trying to be consistent to get some economy of scale in the process.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, so by the time we're finished, what is the size? So Jared, I think you originally said 5 years. The initial was 5 years at 250 a year, right? Which would have been $1,250,000. So right now, what is reflected in our plan in the, by the time we get done and we're where we need to be, where will we stand on this project?
Well, I didn't say the 5 years. I think Chief may have said that, and that may be what it is. I'd have to look into the capital plan to see how many more tranches there would be. I can do that. Just give me 1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, can we talk about the vehicle replacement while he's looking, so we're not sitting here staring at the ceiling?
Sure. Either that or the second line item, Chief, whichever one. You've got two more on here.
Sure. The second line item is replacement of command vehicle. This is a vehicle that we purchased in 2018, and previous to that in 2013, previous to that 2007, 2008. We get 5 years of heavy use out of our command vehicles, and then it's similar to our discussion on fire apparatus. That primary vehicle, which is 5, or by the time that it's replaced, the longer delivery time, 6.5 years old, it becomes a reserve command car. If we have a major event, we staff that vehicle for the on-call assistant chief to cover the rest of the town while we manage the primary incident. During storm events, we bring in an assistant chief and aide in order to maintain, to respond to the hundreds of calls that we experience during some of those storm events. So it does get good use, heavy use. We get 10 years of service life as a primary response vehicle, and then the 2013 vehicle will then become a staff vehicle, shop vehicle for use by the shop.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the board on this one? All right. And the vehicle replacement, so this is the last item on the list, and this is, again, new since last week, the 60,000?
Yeah, this is the last in our process. We had not purchased new staff vehicles for quite some time. It was during a period where the fire department, as well as other municipal departments, were receiving surplus police vehicles. For a lot of reasons, it made less sense, particularly because of the heavy use of those vehicles by the time we got them. The amount of investment we needed to make to convert them for our use. So we have been chipping away over the past 4 years. So there's a gap. 2013 to 2019, we didn't buy any vehicles. Now we're just trying to flush all of the police surplus vehicles out of our fleet. There still remains a couple of Crown Victorias, and those will go out. So we tend to start at the top of the organization with a new vehicle, and the vehicles get passed down. Ultimately, a vehicle driven by a fire inspector will go to surplus, and he'll get the one currently being driven by his boss. But that's how we manage the fleet acquisition. And this will complete that process of replacing our staff vehicles.
Thank you for that. Questions from the board? Okay, great. I don't think we had any more questions.
I have a,
Jared, did you want to?
yeah, I have an answer for you. So we have 3 more years going out, so 25, 26, and 27 is what's in the capital plan right now for fire rehabilitation.
Okay, and those are $250 apiece?
So the third one was, I think we inflated the third one a little bit. It was like 262 or something. I think we added 5% or something
Okay.
to that
All right,
third
and
year.
I'm just, yeah, part of what I'm trying to get my head around, because I know we have upcoming projects for the police station as well. So this is roughly $1.5 million endeavor in all its phases.
Right.
Okay. All right. Any questions on any of these items related to fire department? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to jump to, since Anthony's virtual and the police department, the police are here, why don't we have the police come up next and go through the headquarters rehabilitation. Sorry, guys, that saved you from sitting for about 2 minutes after, 4 hours, but I tried. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So just a quick review of our rehabilitation project. It consists of the lobby rehabilitation, shift commander's office, in addition to expanding the front desk office and the records division office. A part of that project includes a technology package for our community and training room up on the second floor, in addition to replacing the flooring for the police department on the second floor as well.
Okay, thank you. And the board will remember we did have a discussion on this last week. Are there any other questions? I know a couple of you had questions last week, but we wanted to defer any detailed questions to tonight. Are there any questions on this item? Looks like no. I hope you enjoyed sitting here all night for that.
I don't mind it as long as you make it easy on me in the end. and Anthony, you can thank me for that too.
Sometimes
we
it's
get to
worth
come and
going
look at
last
the-
because we're exhausted, we don't ask any questions, so it's worth it. So.
At least you got to listen to that fascinating discussion on our audited financial statements, right? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
everyone.
And last but not least, Anthony, back to you for the playground, Sergeant Murphy playground replacement.
Okay, well, good evening, Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation. Again, Sergeant Murphy Playground is the playground that is at 140 Reach Road. This is between the firehouse and the police station, if you're not familiar with that area. We're looking for $150,000 of funding to replace all the playground equipment that's there with brand new equipment and do some upgrades to the picnic tables and the pavilion that is on site there as well. This budgeted amount of money falls right in line with, as you guys know, roughly the other 7 or 8 project playgrounds that we just recently replaced using ARPA funds. This was the next one on our list. Again, based on the condition of it. Most of our playgrounds, our 29 or so playgrounds, were all put in the mid-90s, and they really haven't been touched since. So they are all, for the most part, at their useful life expectancy. So happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions from the board? I can't see the screen at this point, so please speak up.
We're good. We're good.
Yeah, no questions.
After 4
No
hours, let's call it
questions.
the question.
All right. Okay, so seeing no questions, we can put this, well, let me just, bear with me for a second. Okay, I was just checking to see if we had anyone from the public. We do not. All right, so we can put this to a vote. All those in favor of adopting the resolution to appropriate $760,000 for the costs related to the uses of the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund and the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, as set forth on Exhibit A of the meeting backup, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Looks like we are unanimous, 8-0. Thank you, everyone. All right, and I just, one request for Mr. Schmidt on this ARPA schedule, and I might have asked it before, but I know in the wording to this resolution, we've talked about how much is remaining of what was authorized for the ARPA money, but some of the projects were closed out and there's some remaining funds. So if when we get this for the quarter, if you could just find a way to maybe reflect that in the schedule so that we can actually see how much is left, inclusive of the kind of the excess funds we had for some of those parks and rec projects, et cetera, that would be helpful. So I think we've appropriated, we know what we've appropriated, but we don't know what's remaining given the fact that some of these projects came in under budget. So if we can, if that's not clear, we can talk offline, but I think that would be helpful.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, all right, so let's move to item 7, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. Jerry, do you have anything?
No, I don't.
Okay, Mr. DeWitt, you have something?
Yes, please. I request that by our, I think it's February 21st meeting, that we get the materials that were requested in our 110 meeting, which was the audit findings, bid waivers, because I need that for the purchasing policy, and we're having a purchasing policy meeting here coming up, and the decrease in the waste collection. There was, we were trying to flesh out why that happened, why it went from a fairly large number to almost 0. So if you look at the 110-23 amended meeting minutes, I'm just looking for that data, please. I think it's 221, right? Yeah, okay. That's it.
For the quarterly meeting?
Yep, yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. And I just want to let the board know our next meeting is going to be held via WebEx only. The reason being, and that's the quarterly meeting. The reason for that is that Fair TV has multiple conflicts that night, so they were not able to host a live meeting for us. So we will do it by WebEx, and that will be broadcast live, so they're able to do that. So next meeting, remote, and that'll be our final regular meeting before the budget meeting. All right. I will make a motion to adjourn. Mr. Curley, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Madam Chair.